Hey folks, it's Cody Stoffer with Playmakers Corner, here to tell you about Code Red coaching. Competing in athletics means you've lifted the weights, you've watched film, and you've got the passion. Problem is, that's what everyone else in the state has done. Perfect your game by honing in on your mental performance with Code Red coaching. Whether you are a team or an individual, Code Red coaching has the tools to create mentally solid habits and set up you or your team for success. Find Code Red Coaching at coderedcoaching.com or call 720-979-1914 to learn more today. That's coderedcoaching.com or 720-979-1914 today. Now back to the show.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? This is Phoenix Barons with Playmakers Corner, and I'm here to give the final recap of the 1A football regular season, Week 10. So let's get right into it. A lot of games to go through that had a lot of playoff implications on the line, crazy wins and interesting upsets. So let's get right into it. Starting off, I like to go Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but Thursday there was just one game that was actually forfeited on Halloween night, Manual at Jefferson. Jefferson forfeited to Manual, so there was no game that was played on Thursday at all. So let's get right into Friday Night Lights, the last Friday Night Lights of the regular season in 1A football. And as of this recording, Monday morning, I'm just going off of the stats that have been provided as of November 4th. So let's get right into it, starting off with the Friday night game on November 1st. And now, as of this morning, Center has not uploaded any stats, but they were the team that came out victorious in their matchup over Trinidad. Trinidad, they did give a fight. Number 7, Isaiah Moreno, the sophomore, 8 for 16 with 168 yards through the air, getting 3 passing touchdowns, but 2 interceptions would be the hindrance for this team that would give Center the advantage they needed. But it was an unfortunate loss for the Trinidad Miners as they fall short to the Center Vikings, 41-24 on the road. Forge Christian at Denver Christian. This was an interesting matchup. Forge Christian, they were going, I hate to say going into a trap game because Denver Christian really should not be a trap game for them at all, and it really wasn't. They went into Denver Christian's house and came away with a tremendous victory with a big time shutout, 42-0. Number 15, Sullivan Strange, the senior, 6 of 9 for 118 yards and 4 touchdowns, as well as having a carry for 15 yards. Also saw some good things out of number 11, Dante Vigil, had 3 carries for 52 yards. And number 3, Quentin Torres, the junior, who had a carry for 20 yards and a touchdown, and receiving 2 receptions for 58 yards and 2 of those touchdowns. He also got it done on defense, having 2 interceptions as well, so he was a solid performer in their matchup. And also got to give a shout out to number 32, Hunter Hall, the senior, who had 5 tackles, one of which was for a loss, as well as a sack and a fumble return and a fumble recovery that was returned for a touchdown. So a big game for Forge Christian as they come away with the win to close out their undefeated season over Denver Christian. Colorado Springs Christian at Buena Vista. We're not done with the Christian schools just yet, as Colorado Springs Christian went into Buena Vista's house, but Buena Vista was pretty much done with them because they absolutely did as much as they wanted with them as possible. Number 7, Hudson Wingo, the junior, 5 for 7 for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns, as well as having 1 interception, 4 carries for 15 yards as well. But Eli Shooknecht, number 16, the junior, 13 carries for 153 yards and 4 touchdowns, and the kicker, a 22-yard punt return touchdown as well. He had 5 total touchdowns in their matchup over Colorado Springs Christian. Also got to give shout outs to number 3, Trade Cardwell, the senior, who had 11 carries for 84 yards and a touchdown, as well as 2 receptions for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. So both receptions resulting in touchdowns. Got to give a shout out as well to number 14, Caleb Pierce, who had some involvement on offense, having 2 receptions for 56 yards, but an interception was where he contributed the best on defense. Also, number 15, Mac Bigley, the senior, had an interception himself. And finally, number 75, Abel Flowers, the junior, 9 tackles, 2 of which were for a loss, a sack, and a blocked field goal. They did practically whatever they wanted with Colorado Springs Christian as Buena Vista go into the playoffs off of a 68-18 win. Centauri at Monte Vista. Now, as of this recording, Centauri has not uploaded any stats, but they were the favorites into this. They were undefeated. Monte Vista, they had a lot to prove. This was definitely a bell cow matchup for the South Central League Championship. This was it. This was whoever would win this game was going to be league champs, and Monte Vista had the home field advantage and took full advantage as they were able to get the win over Centauri 36-26. A big win for the Monte Vista Pirates. They've had an interesting season so far, and the 2 forfeit matchups came in clutch with that long break. They were ready for Centauri and took care of business. Huge performances from number 45, Jacob Pacheco, the senior, having 21 carries for 216 yards and 3 touchdowns, as well as 1 fumble, but wasn't anything that Monte Vista couldn't fix and recover from. Number 1, Azariah Hurtado, the junior, had 6 receptions for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. And on defense, 2 interceptions and 1 fumble recovery, helping with 3 turnovers in their defensive effort. Defense had a day, 5 forced fumbles and recovering 4 of them. Number 4, Alex Marquez, the senior, who had 12 tackles, 10 of which were solo, 2 assisted, was involved as well, making that happen, having a sack and 2 forced fumbles, as well as a blocked field goal. He was a dog out there, a defensive powerhouse for Monte Vista, and absolutely what they needed as they got the win over Centauri 36-26. Pinnacle at Estes Park. Now, no stats were uploaded from this game, but both these teams have had pretty rough seasons so far. But Estes Park, they were the home team in this one, and they got to give their fans and the families something to go home and smile about as the season came to a close. And what better way to go home smiling than a shutout as they completely took down Pinnacle 46-0 at home. Good win for Estes Park as they close out their season. Wiggins and Ray. This was a big matchup for both teams as Ray and Wiggins had a big matchup with lots of playoff implications on the line. And Ray knew exactly what they were going in for. Wiggins knew what they were going in for. Ray, undefeated. They have been the best team in 1A football. Wiggins, they've had some ups and downs with a lot of good teams, a lot of close ones with even teams such as Lyman. But they had a real challenge in front of them, and Ray had to protect their standings in the league, and they did just that. Going into Wiggins' house and coming away with a 42-7 win with some solid performances from the Uge. Number 3, Samuel Meisner, who had 10 carries for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also, number 1, Casey Midcap, the senior, 4 for 6 for 116 yards and a touchdown, although throwing 1 interception. It was on the ground where they delivered the most, having 8 carries for 42 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was a baller out there. It was a good performance from Ray and also a good challenge for Wiggins. They had some fight. Jason Lewisberg, 16 carries for 48 yards and a touchdown, but this was just Ray's game. They had practically did whatever they wanted with them. Huge performance as well from Aaron Tina, who had a interception in that game alongside number 7, Austin Collins, the junior. Good win for Ray as they take down league opponent Wiggins on the road. North Fork at Roaring Fork. Battle of the Forks. And it was pretty much a one-sided fork as North Fork punched their ticket into the playoffs, taking down Roaring Fork 41-6. And North Fork pretty much did whatever they wanted with Roaring Fork as number 1, Payson Penne, the senior, had 22 carries for 162 yards and 4 touchdowns. Good performance from him. Also got to give a shout out to number 4, Derek Syvertson, the junior, who had 6 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown. And the defense contributed big as number 50, Payson Miller, the sophomore, had 8 tackles, 5 of which were solo, 4 tackles for a loss, and 2 sacks. Another defensive performance from number 24, Skylar Anderson, who although had contributed on offense as well, getting 3 carries for 14 yards and a touchdown. He also got it done on defense, having 4 tackles, 1 tackle for a loss, a sack, and a fumble recovery as North Fork punched their ticket into the playoffs against Roaring Fork. Highland at Platte Valley. Now, we don't have stats from Highland in this one, but this was a big win for Platte Valley, as they had to pretty much win this game and they were in the playoffs, and they did just that, remaining perfect in League 6 as they hosted Highland, who have been the front runners right now in 1A, one of the top teams going in, and Platte Valley just took care of business at home, protecting their house. Good performance from Reagan Edstrom, who had 15 for 22 for 146 yards, as well as having 6 carries for 37. But it was Taylon Short, the senior, number 19, who had 11 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown. It was a big win for Platte Valley. It was a good win for Platte Valley. They had a lot of momentum against them. They had a really rough season. 5 losses in a row to start off league play. They were underestimated a lot, but they prevailed, and now they are in the playoffs after going undefeated in league in their win over Highland. Cedar Edge at Olaf. We don't have any stats from either team as of this recording, but it was a complete domination from Cedar Edge as they took down Olaf 50-12 on the road. Huge win for Cedar Edge as they close out their season. And Olaf, they had a little bit of optimism to start off, but in the end, it was not enough to propel them in league as they fall short once again. Dolores Huerta Prep at Rye. Dolores Huerta Prep forfeited this matchup and elected not to travel to Rye for this game, so Rye gets the free win to end their season. So their season ends with no game, which is really unfortunate. But Rye gets the free win off of the forfeit. Peyton at Ellicott. Peyton, this was a team that was heavily favored to go to the playoffs, and they just had to beat Ellicott. Ellicott, who is a team that not necessarily scares people. I'll call it upright. I mean, this is a team that I have faced before in high school, and we were definitely not afraid to face them at all. They've had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of rough patches throughout their season, but Ellicott, they dug down deep. They knew that this was their last game. This was going to be a big one for them to shock Peyton at home and practically close out their season, and that's exactly what they did as Ellicott got the win over Peyton 20-18 at home. Absolute shocker in 1A as Peyton's playoff dreams are crumbled up in dust. Pretty solid performance out of number 2, Colton Cobb, who was 2 for 4 for 20 yards and a touchdown, as well as having 17 carries for 79 yards, and on defense getting 1 interception, 8 tackles, and a tackle for a loss. Number 7, John Finlay Wagner, the junior, also having 9 carries for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns in their loss. Unfortunate loss for Peyton as they fall short. Just a really tough one to close out their season. Meeker at Grand Valley. Meeker had some tough losses to start off, going 0 for 2, and since then they have been winning every single game, dominating the Western Slope, and it continued as they went into Grand Valley, and they got the win 53-6. Completely obliterated Grand Valley. Number 11, Cade Mills, the sophomore, 5 for 7 for 57 yards and a touchdown, as well as getting 6 carries for 60 yards and a touchdown. And number 22, Clay Crawford, the senior, 3 carries, 144 yards, and 2 of them becoming touchdowns. That's crazy. A great performance from them. Also got to give shout-outs to Cade Blunt, the senior, who had 9 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown, as well as Saeed Rodriguez, the sophomore, 4 carries for 34 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as having 2 receptions for 38 yards and 1 touchdown. He was responsible for 3 of the team's touchdowns. And number 3, Tyler Sanders, the senior, having 2 interceptions, one of them resulting in a pick 6. Meeker did whatever they wanted in Grand Valley, and they came away with a win and practically sealed their spot in the playoffs. Lyman at Yuma. Lyman had a lot of tough losses in league, And Yuma was definitely a team that could do that to them again. Yuma has had some interesting wins over Holyoke. Holyoke being a team that beat Lyman, so this was a must-win game for Lyman, and they knew that. They traveled to Yuma and absolutely took care of business, getting a 35-0 shutout to close out their league competition. Number 3, Aiden Coleth, who had 5 carries for 69 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as 3 for 6 for 46 yards, but Lyman just gets it done on the ground, as you can see with number 12, Skylar McCready, the senior, 15 carries for 83 yards and a touchdown. Number 21, Jacob Jocklick, the junior, 7 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown. And finally, got to give props to the freshman, number 23, Camden Tacha, who had 5 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown. Get it done on the ground, and that's pretty much how they did it. All 5 touchdowns on the ground, and Lyman are now on the ground and running towards the playoffs, beating Yuma. Holyoke at Burlington. Now, as of this recording, Holyoke has not uploaded any stats, but they were dropped down to reality by Burlington. Burlington, they were on the edge of a playoff appearance, and they had to win to pretty much seal their opportunity to be in the playoffs this year, and that's what they did. They took care of business at home. Holyoke making the long trip down to I-70 to Burlington, and it was a close one. It was a close matchup. Can't deny that. It was a really good matchup between both teams. Burlington was down 14-7 in the half, and then in the third quarter they shot up and scored 21 points. Both teams scoring a touchdown each in the fourth quarter, and it would not be enough for Holyoke as they fall short to Burlington. Huge performances from number 2, Anthony Estrada, the junior. 13 carries for 110 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also got to give a shout out to number 4, Jason Sosdo, the junior, who had 8 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. And man, what a performance from Burlington. They had a really good game. Number 77, Stanton Cure, getting it done on defense, the senior. 10 total tackles, 2 of which were for a loss, and having 2 sacks. And Howdy Humrick, the senior, number 81, having an interception on defense as well. Good win for Burlington as they punch their ticket into the playoffs as they get the win at home. For the final game on Friday, Del Norte forfeiting their matchup against Ignacio. They didn't make the trip. Del Norte pretty much forfeited the rest of their season, and now their season is over, having only played like 1 or 2 games. So really unfortunate the way their season turned out. Ignacio, they had a pretty decent team. I mean, they weren't going into the playoffs by any means, but they had some pretty impressive wins, to say the least. They could win games, and that speaks for something for that team. So they get a free win to close out their season. And finally, let's go to Saturday. We have 2 games to talk about as 2A Inglewood in Platte Canyon. Platte Canyon has had a rough season. I'm not even going to lie. They've had a lot of beatdowns, and this was nothing short of a beatdown. 49-6 was the final score as Platte Canyon got crucified by Inglewood. It was a tough game to watch if you're Platte Canyon. Inglewood making the trip all the way to Bailey, and they took care of business. And Platte Canyon's season ends on a very tough loss. And finally, Flatirons Academy at Prospect Ridge Academy. Flatirons Academy on the edge of reaching the playoffs, and they knew they had to win this one if they wanted to punch their ticket, and they did just that, taking care of business as always. 41-8 was the final score in this one. Huge performances from number 3, Noah Parker, the senior, who had 15 carries for 112 yards and a touchdown. Number 7, Parker Wilson, the senior, who had 13 carries for 154 yards and 3 touchdowns. And number 33, Zeke Friedman, the freshman, having 18 carries for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. 3 100-yard rushers in this matchup. That's crazy. And also number 88, Gunnar Ast, the freshman, having 2 interceptions on defense. Flatirons Academy did pretty much whatever they wanted with Prospect Ridge, and they got the win. And so that'll do it for my recap. And to close it out, we have Playmaker of the Week. I have 5 candidates. They've really done a good job this week and definitely deserve recognition and high praise. I'm going to start it off with Forge Christian's number 3, Quentin Torres, the junior. He had 1 carry that went 20 yards for a touchdown, 2 receptions that went 58 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And if that wasn't enough, 2 interceptions on defense. He delivers plays for Forge Christian when it matters most and did just that. I also have Buena Vista's number 16, Eli Shooknecht, the junior, 13 carries for 153 yards and 4 touchdowns. But it's the 22-yard punt return touchdown that really caught my eye. Huge performance from him as Buena Vista gets the dominating win that they needed. Monte Vista, they actually have 2 candidates. This was such an impressive performance by this team as they got their win over Centauri that I had to pick 2 candidates. I couldn't just leave one of these guys out for sure. But my 2 candidates from Monte Vista are number 1, Azariah Hurtado, the junior, who had 6 receptions for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. But it's his 2 interceptions and 1 fumble recovery on defense that was really the turning point for me. Huge to be able to make those receiving plays and then go on defense to get those turnovers in the same game, in a crucial game against the top team in Centauri. And number 4, Alex Marquez, the senior, a defensive powerhouse, having 12 tackles, 10 of which were solo, 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, and then a blocked field goal. He was a momentum shifter for Monte Vista and a big reason why they got the win over Centauri. And my final candidate, North Fork's number 1, Payson Penne, the senior, who had 22 carries for 162 yards and 4 touchdowns in a big win that practically sealed their spot in the playoffs. It was a great performance from him. And for my Playmaker of the Week, every week, I try to pick someone who exemplifies what I envision as a playmaker, someone that can get it done on multiple sides of the ball, whether that's offense, defense, or special teams. So I'm going to give my Playmaker of the Week to number 16, Eli Shooknecht out of Buena Vista for his performance against Colorado Springs Christian. His 13 carries for 153 yards, resulting in 4 touchdowns, is solid. But getting a 22-yard punt return touchdown as well on top of it, 5 total touchdowns in their obliterating game against Colorado Springs Christian is huge. So for that reason, he is my Playmaker of the Week to close out the regular season. Congratulations to all the candidates. You are all playmakers as well. And it'll be really fun to see all these guys in the playoffs. And I will be coming out with my 1A playoff preview very soon. So stay tuned, and thank you so much for listening. Hey, what is going on, everybody? This is Phoenix Barons with Playmakers Corner, and I'm here to give the 1A 2024 Colorado High School Football Playoff preview. We officially have closed out the regular season. It is now time for the playoffs. Playoff bracket has just been recently released, so I'm going to go through all of the matchups for the first round of the playoffs, give some predictions, some key players, some wins and losses that each team has experienced leading up to this point. To get us started, this recording was done Monday, November 4th. We'll essentially be going through this exactly how the bracket is laid out by CHASA from top to bottom. We'll start off with the 1 seed and the 16 seed, followed by the 8 seed and the 9 seed, then the 4 seed and the 13 seed, the 5 seed taking on the 12 seed, the 2 seed taking on the 15 seed, the 7 seed taking on the 10 seed, the 6 seed taking on the 11 seed, and finally to close it out, the 3 seed taking on the 14 seed. Let's get right into this. Starting off with the 1 seed and the 16 seed matchup. For the 1 seed, it is Ray hosting North Fork. Starting off with Ray, they are sitting at 9-0 overall with 5-0 record in the North Central League. Top players include quarterback number 1 Casey Midcap, running back and middle linebacker number 3 Samuel Meisner, and wide receiver cornerback number 19 Aaron Tina, the junior. All these guys have been very impressive thus far and key contributors to why Ray is at where they're at right now. Key wins include their October 18th matchup against Lyman, where they demolished them 42-7. And another key win that I thought was really interesting was their September 13th win over Scott Scott City, Kansas. Scott City right now, they're one of the top teams in Kansas. So for one of our 1A teams to take down a top team in Kansas, that's pretty impressive, especially right now as they sit undefeated. They took out Scott City 42-14 that game. And for North Fork, they come into this matchup at 6-3, 4-1 in the Western Slope League. Top players include number 1 Payson Penne, the senior, number 4 running back and middle linebacker Derek Syvertson, the junior, and number 50 middle linebacker and offensive lineman Payson Miller, the sophomore. Payson Miller is a defensive powerhouse. Some of North Fork's best wins includes this past weekend on November 1st, where they took out Roaring Fork on the road 41-6, and also had a good win in September 27th against 2A Gunnison 18-7. Notable losses include their loss to Monta Vista on September 13th, 20-43, as well as hosting Meeker and losing 41-14. This is going to be a really good matchup. I'm actually very excited to see how this one pans out. Ray, obviously being the top team, they're not getting a pushover 16 seed this year. This is a solid number 16 seed. You know, if it wasn't going to be Meeker in the Western Slope, it was definitely going to be North Fork. That notable loss that they had is definitely an inkling to what we could see between North Fork and Ray. Ray is definitely a lot more disciplined than Meeker, so it should be a really, really good matchup. I'm very excited for this matchup. I have Ray taking down North Fork, though, 49-0. I think Ray is just going to be a very high-powered team. They're going to come in, no funny business. North Fork has a long way to go, all the way from the western side of Colorado going to practically the northeastern corner of Colorado in Ray. It's a cross-country trip for North Fork, and it's going to be a long drive for them. I think Ray takes care of business. Some other scores from the Playmakers Corner crew. Gideon has Ray shutting out North Fork 42-0. Cody has Ray shutting out North Fork 50-0. And Simon has Ray shutting out North Fork 42-0. Most of Playmakers Corner are pretty much in agreement that Ray will shut out North Fork. I hope North Fork does prove us wrong. They've had a very good season this far, and it would be a real shame for their season to end on a shutout like that. And continuing on into the 8 and 9 seed matchup, right now the 8 seed is Highland. They enter the playoffs at 7-2 with a 3-1 league record. Their only loss coming to Platte Valley. Top players include number 7 quarterback John Bingley, the senior, and number 33 running back Wyatt Chase Jr. Also got to give a shout out to the defensive powerhouse for Highland, number 8 Brogan Palmer. 52 tackles, 23 tackles for a loss, and 11 sacks, as well as 7 forced fumbles, 2 of them being recovered by himself. And what a dog. They would be taking on the number 9 seed Flatirons Academy, who enter as 6-3 and 3-1 in the Frontier League. These two teams have actually faced each other, with Highland coming out on top, hosting Flatirons Academy. On August 30th, they got the win, 30-7. Some other notable wins for Highland include their win over 2A Bennett, as they went on the road for that September 27th. Down 22-7 halfway through the second quarter, they managed to come back and win 33-30 against them. A good win for them. Some notable losses, though, for Highland. They lost to Wiggins, getting shut out 14-0 September 13th. Also, their loss to Platte Valley, as I mentioned earlier, was just this past weekend, where they fell short 14-15 against them on the road. Flatirons Academy is kind of in that similar boat as Highland. Their top players include Parker Wilson, the quarterback, the senior quarterback, number 7, including his favorite target, number 82, Brandon Ewing, the senior, and number 3, Noah Evans, who has been picking up some of the slack in the absence of Elijah Rika, the junior. Rika's been out since October 11th. He had 23 carries for 749 yards and 11 touchdowns before he was eventually injured. Parker Wilson right now on the ground has 894 yards and 11 touchdowns. So between the both of them, they've been a dynamic running attack. But Noah Evans has kind of been picking up the slack on the run game. The best wins for Flatirons Academy so far have been their win over Peyton back in September, 44-8. And also this past weekend, getting a win over Prospect Ridge Academy, 41-8. Some good wins wins for them, but some notable losses. They've lost 3 games. Like I mentioned, their Highland matchup in August. They also lost to Lyman 14-35 that week after, and then a month later they got shut out by Forge Christian 42-0. They've played some really good teams, but everyone else they've been able to beat. So this will be a really interesting matchup between Flatirons Academy and Highland. 2 teams that have faced each other already. I have Flatirons Academy upsetting Highland on the road. I just think Flatirons Academy will have a lot more momentum than Highland. Highland got humbled by Platte Valley this past weekend, so I think Flatirons Academy have a tremendous advantage. They've played this team before. They know exactly what they've done wrong. They're going to go in and do exactly what they need to do to turn that around. Highland will give them a fight, but I have Flatirons Academy over Highland 29-7. Some final scores from the rest of the Playmakers Corner crew. Gideon has Highland over Flatirons Academy 28-3. Cody has Highland over Flatirons Academy 31-19. And finally, Simon has Highland over Flatirons Academy 21-0. I don't know. I still think Flatirons Academy could give them a fight, but we shall see. This will be the most even matchup, at least one of the most even matchups in the playoffs so far, with the 8 and 9 seed practically in the middle of the pack. So we shall see with that matchup. Moving on, we have the 4 and 13 seed matchup, with the 4 seed being Centauri. They enter the playoffs at 8 and 1. 4-1 in the South Central League. Their only loss coming to Monte Vista, which was just this past weekend, falling short to Monte Vista 36-26. Top players include Sean Jarvis, the junior, and Carson Showcraft, the junior, and also Parker Burr. Now, Parker Burr has been out for quite some time, and he finally came back this past weekend, as Gideon had told me, for the Monte Vista game. So him coming right back into the lineup will be really interesting to see from Centauri, but that loss is definitely tough for them as they lose out on their league championship, but they still have an impressive record enough to put them at the seed that they're at right now. Some of their best wins include their season opener against Meeker, where they went to Meeker and took them down 33-6. They also did a good job on the road against Buena Vista 2 weeks later, beating them 19-13. And like I said, their only loss was on the road to Monte Vista, but they're able to get it done on the road. So it was really interesting to see them not do the same with Monte Vista this time around. But they'll be going up against number 13 Holyoke, who enter the playoffs at 3-4, 2-3 in the North Central. They're in this because of strength of schedule. They're in a very, very tough league, in the same league as Ray, Lyman, Wiggins, Burlington. So Holyoke just made it in. My guess is they made it in with wins over Lyman and Wiggins, especially their win over Lyman on the road 20-17, and their win over Wiggins at home 19-14 is what propelled them into the playoff spot that they're in now. However, they have sustained some tough losses, including a massive blowout to Ray at home on October 3rd. 49-7, and then just this past weekend they were in Burlington and fell short 35-21. There isn't really any complete stats for Holyoke as of this recording, so it's hard for me to judge who are the top players of that team. But Centauri will be given a tough challenge with Holyoke. They're a gritty team. They do like to go in there and get those tough wins and nail them out, and they will be on the road, and going on the road is not necessarily a big challenge for them, but we shall see how this matchup goes. I currently have Centauri over Holyoke 40-16 in my bracket. Other scores from the Playmakers Corner crew: Gideon has Centauri over Holyoke 28-21 in a pretty close one. Cody has Centauri over Holyoke 40-15, and then Simon has Centauri over Holyoke 35-0. So should be a really interesting matchup. Everyone is definitely leaning towards Centauri, but don't sleep on Holyoke because they definitely can get some wins against some top 1A teams. The 5 and 12 seed matchup. Right now the 5 seed is Buena Vista. They come in at 7-2 overall, 5-0 in the Tri-Peaks. They are the Tri-Peaks League champions. Some of their top players include number 7 quarterback Hudson Wingo, the junior, number 21 Tucker Montoya, the junior, number 3 Trade Cardwell, the senior, and the top dog, number 16, Eli Shooknecht, the junior. Shooknecht has over 1,000 yards rushing this season, including 12 rushing touchdowns. Hudson Wingo, he has 14 touchdowns through the air, including 7 interceptions. A lot of those went over to Trey Cardwell, who has 11 receptions for 201 yards and 2 touchdowns. But on the ground, he also delivers, having 547 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns. Tucker Montoya as well has been a top target for Wingo, having 218 yards and 3 touchdowns, as well as 165 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. But on defense, he also puts in on the stats, having 2 interceptions this season. Buena Vista is a very complete team. Despite their 2 losses going to Centauri and Lyman, that's not losses to hang your head on, especially looking at the score. They lost to Centauri at home 19-13, and then they went into Lyman's house and fell short 26-13. 1 to 2 score losses against two top tier teams like that is nothing to hang your hat on, especially when you look at the wins that they've had. They beat Peyton on the road, a clutch league opponent matchup that they had to seal out. 33-7 was the final score of that one. They also beat Platte Valley, a team that has been in 2A for many years and dropped down to 1A. Were able to beat them out at home 39-35 September 6th. So it'll be really interesting to see Buena Vista, and they will be taking on number 12 Burlington, who just punched their ticket after their win over Holyoke this past weekend, 35-21. Burlington entered the playoffs at 4-5 and 2-3 in the North Central League, that very, very tough league. They were able to get some wins in that league, including their Holyoke win. Top players from Burlington include number 8, Weston Shaw, the sophomore, number 3, Scout Humrick, the sophomore, and number 77, Stanton Cure, who had 70 tackles, 3 tackles for a loss, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles this season. This is a good team, Burlington. They've been pretty up and down this season with clutch wins over Holyoke and Platte Valley to start off their season. Kind of getting the gears going with that one, with their Platte Valley matchup, shutting them down 34-10. Notable losses though, and these losses are very close. They lost to Lyman on the road October 25th, 7-12 in that tough loss. But it was a very close game. What was also a close game was their matchup with Lamar, who is one of the top teams in 2A right now. They only have 1 real loss to the undefeated Woodland Park. Lamar does. Burlington was able to go toe-to-toe with Lamar 6-7, and that's a long drive between Lamar and Burlington. So able to go on the road and keeping it close like that, it's an ugly loss, but it's also an ugly win. It was just an ugly game overall. But Burlington will be taking on Buena Vista in this playoff matchup. I have Buena Vista over Burlington, 35-18. Scores from the rest of the Playmakers Corner crew. Gideon has Buena Vista over Burlington, 14-7 in a close scored matchup. Cody has Buena Vista over Burlington, 21-20 in an even closer matchup. And then Simon has Buena Vista over Burlington, 14-0 in a close shutout. Heavily leaning towards Buena Vista in this one, because Buena Vista, they're a very complete team, and it's going to be a very, very daunting challenge for Burlington making that trip to Buena Vista and hopefully pulling out a win. The 2-15 seed matchup. Number 2 seed Forge Christian, highly regarded as one of the best teams in 1A, if not the best team in 1A. They've been in 2A for so many years. This is their first year in 1A, and they come in undefeated, 9-0 overall, 4-0 in the Frontier League, albeit that Frontier League is not necessarily the most impressive league. But they have some star power with quarterback number 15, Sullivan Strange, the senior. Also number 4, running back Eli Tafoya, the senior. And number 11, running back and outside linebacker Dante Vigil, the senior. The Swiss Army knife for Forge Christian, able to receive, able to run, and able to throw touchdowns wherever he can. Forge Christian have had some very impressive wins this season, and being undefeated, no notable losses to take note of, but take note of these wins. They have back-to-back wins over 2A opponents, Kent Denver and Manitou Springs, from September 20th and 27th, both of them in such big matchups. Kent Denver 50-6, and then that following going to Manitou Springs and shutting them out 49-0 is not an easy task for a 1A team, but Forge Christian got the job done, and they will be hosting Yuma, and Yuma is also part of that North Central League, very, very tough league that they've had, and they've had some absolute dogs in there, including number 1, Jonathan Thompson, the senior. I'm guessing little brother, number 7, Christian Thompson, the sophomore, and number 6, Adrian Carranza, the senior, who was able to get it done on offense and defense. Yuma has had some interesting games so far, with some really impressive wins over 2A Brush in a 27-24 overtime thriller, and then also getting a win over Holyoke a week after Holyoke had defeated Lyman. They beat them 28-22, Yuma over Holyoke. But some notable losses, though, they weren't as close to facing Lyman as Burlington was, getting shut out by them last weekend, 35-0. They were also shut out by Ray October 25th, 44-0. So Yuma will have a very, very tough task in front of them because they haven't been so lucky with top-tier 1A teams, and this will be no different as they face number 2 seeded Forge Christian. I have Forge Christian over Yuma 42-12 in my bracket. Other scores from the Playmakers Corner crew. Gideon has Forge Christian over Yuma 35-10. Cody has Forge Christian over Yuma 56-6. And Simon has Forge Christian over Yuma 35-0. So this will be a really interesting matchup, and I am mostly confident that Forge Christian will move on into the second round after their matchup with Yuma. And now for the number 7 seed taking on the number 10 seed. For the number 7 seed, we have Meeker, who enters at 7-2 overall with a 5-0 record in the Western Slope League. Taking on the number 10 seed, Monte Vista, who are also 7-2 overall with a 5-0 record in the South Central League. So two teams who are pretty much at the top of their game right now with very impressive league records. Both are league champions. Both have had impressive wins, and both have had 2 devastating losses. But one of them have beaten Centauri. And Mountain Vista beat Centauri last weekend to win the South Central League Championship. And Meeker started off their season facing Centauri and losing to them 33-6. Meeker also had a tough loss to Wiggins at home that next week after, starting off their season 0-2, but then winning 7 straight games from then on, with including wins over 2A Gunnison 26-12 and league opponent North Fork 41-14. With the help of some of their top players, number 11 quarterback Cade Mills, the sophomore, number 22 Clay Crawford, the senior, and Cade Blunt, the senior. All of them have been key parts in getting Meeker to where they are right now. Monte Vista has also got themselves a pretty solid squad. Number 3 Caden Madrid, the senior quarterback. Number 45 running back Jacob Pacheco, the senior. Number 1 wide receiver and defensive back Azariah Hurtado, the junior, a favorite to being one of the top players in 1A right now. And their firepower of a defensive player, number 4 wide receiver and defensive back Alex Marquez. Marquez has been an absolute dog this year on defense. 67 tackles, 3 of which were for a loss, including 6 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and a blocked field goal. That's just something you don't usually see out of a defensive back. And Hurtado has been a difference maker for Monte Vista. 12 touchdowns along with 674 receiving yards. All of that receiving, which is beyond impressive, as well as having 56 tackles, a tackle for a loss, 8 interceptions, a forced fumble, and 2 fumble recoveries, and as well as having 1 kickoff return and a punt return touchdown this season. Monte Vista have been firing on all cylinders. They've had some solid wins over Centauri and North Fork. They've also have beaten North Fork themselves earlier on in the season, 43-20, but their 2 losses come to 2A opponents in Pagosa Springs, 28-6, and to start off their season was their loss to 2A Alamosa, 28-8. But Monte Vista has gone through it. They're now ready for some real challenge, and Meeker will definitely be a real challenge for them as they'll have to travel all the way to Meeker for their matchup. I have Meeker over Monte Vista 41-21. I think Meeker's just going to have that home field advantage. But Monte Vista, they could definitely prove me wrong. They are a really, really good team that can get it done on all cylinders. Some score predictions from the rest of the crew. Gideon has Monte Vista beating Meeker 28-17. Cody has Monte Vista just edging out Meeker 14-12. And Simon has Monte Vista shutting out Meeker 28-0. I'm the minority here. I think Meeker could Meeker's home field advantage is definitely something else. I say that from personal experience. But Monte Vista, they are definitely one of the top teams in 1A football right now, and I would not be surprised at all if they got the win over Meeker as well. So that will be a very interesting matchup to watch. One of the more even matchups in the playoffs. The 6th seed taking on the number 11 seed. This year, the number 6 seed is Wiggins. They are 4-5 as they enter with a 2-3 North Central League record. Another one of those teams that are in a very, very, very tough league. One of the best leagues in 1A football, if not the best league in 1A football. They will be hosting number 11 Colorado Springs Christian, who entered the playoffs at 5-4 with a 3-2 league record in the Tri-Peaks. Wiggins have been very impressive so far. I mean, they had some good wins to start off their season, including wins over Meeker on the road, all the way from Wiggins to Meeker, and they came out with the win 27-12, and including a home win over Highland 14-0, shutting them out. But they have had some tough losses, including to Lyman on a close one on October 4th, 21-19, just falling short to them. And then they went and faced Strasburg, the 2A team that have been at the top of the 2A playoff seeding. They got shut out by them at Strasburg, 21-0. And they've had a good group of guys that led them through the charge, with number 4 running back and wide receiver Jason Lewisberg, the senior, who had over 1,000 yards rushing, including 10 touchdowns. And their quarterback helping them lead the way, number 5, J.R. Meyer, the senior, who had 581 yards as well as a touchdown and 6 interceptions. Not necessarily the best passing stats for him right now, but it's on defense where he does contribute the best, leading the team in tackles with 97 and an interception. And their defensive star as well, number 51, Mark Walker, the defensive tackle and offensive lineman, having 68 tackles, 8 sacks, leading the team, and a blocked field goal this season. Wiggins have been a really gritty team, but Colorado Springs Christian are just as gritty. They have some really good offensive firepower as well, with the quarterback favorite, number 7, Jace Velasquez, the senior. He has 1,562 passing yards and 17 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. And if that wasn't enough, he gets it done on the ground as well. 464 yards rushing and 12 touchdowns. 29 touchdowns from Velasquez. And if that wasn't enough, he has a whole group of guys that's also scoring touchdowns around him. Daniel Hoggard, number 40, the junior, the wide receiver safety, who's mostly been used as a running back this season, having 99 carries for 731 yards and 14 touchdowns. And also number 1, Mikey Orawick, the junior, who had 569 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns. This is a high-scoring team. They love to score a lot of points, as shown from their wins over 2A Florence, 27-24, and a big-time blowout against Platte Canyon, 60-6. But they have had some tough losses, including losses to Buena Vista this past weekend, getting absolutely blown out by them, 68-18. They also had a tough loss to Lyman to start off their season, 28-42, and also a loss to the undefeated Woodland Park of 2A, 28-25. So they do keep it close with some good opponents, but then they get blown out of the water by top tier 1A teams as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how Colorado Springs Christian plays against Wiggins. I currently have Wiggins over Colorado Springs Christian, 32-16 as the final score. Some scores from the rest of the crew. Gideon has Wiggins over Colorado Springs Christian, 21-14. Cody has Wiggins over Colorado Springs Christian, 38-21. And Simon has Colorado Springs Christian over Wiggins, 14-7. So he's the only one that picked Colorado Springs Christian for this one in a close game. And that's not actually a bad guess either. But so far, Wiggins is definitely the favorite going into their matchup in round 1. And finally, we have the 3 seed taking on the 14 seed. Number 3 is Lyman. Lyman have been the top team in 1A for many years, and they've had a couple humbling losses this season now that they're no longer the top dog, even in their own league. They enter as a 7-2 record with a 3-2 league record in the North Central, led by quarterback number 3, Aiden Coleth, the junior, who had 674 yards and 8 touchdowns through the air, but also 484 yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground, supporting running backs like Skylar McCready, the senior, 568 yards this year with 6 touchdowns, as well as on defense getting 3 tackles for a loss, a sack, and an interception. And Jacob Joklik, the fullback and linebacker, number 21, the junior, had 485 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground, including 135 yards receiving with 2 touchdowns. And on defense, he's been able to get it done as well, having 3 tackles for a loss and 2 interceptions. And they would have to face number 14, Platte Valley. Platte Valley sealed their playoff ticket by going undefeated in 1A League 6, going 4-0 after their win over Highland in their matchup last weekend. And now Platte Valley are in the playoffs after starting 0-5 in non-conference play. They go 4-0 in league, and now they are in the playoffs. Led by number 3 quarterback Reagan Edstrom, the junior, who had 1,304 yards and 14 touchdowns through the air, as well as 6 interceptions. Can't forget his 203 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. He's had a little bit of help, though, with Talon Short, number 19, the senior. 634 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns, 179 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns, and over 100 tackles on defense, 13 of which were for a loss. 3 sacks, 3 interceptions, a forced fumble, 2 recovered, and a blocked punt. He gets it done on both sides of the ball. And how could I forget number 18, Jason Harrison, the sophomore, who had 23 receptions for 258 yards and 3 touchdowns, and also getting it done on defense, having 4 tackles for a loss, a sack, and a forced fumble. Platte Valley will be a very interesting opponent for Lyman, as Lyman have had a lot of ups, but some concerning downs, including notable losses to Holyoke, 20-17 at home, and then absolutely getting blown out of the water by league opponent Ray, 42-7 that next week. Back-to-back weeks with losses. Lyman, they have had some very impressive wins, including wins over Buena Vista and Wiggins, so they are still a team that can compete with the best of them. But some up-and-coming teams, they are definitely giving them a challenge, especially in their own league. And Platte Valley, they're part of I don't consider League 6 much of a challenge, really. I mean, they didn't have too many playoff contending teams on there other than Highland, and they beat Highland. They beat Highland 15-14 this past weekend, and then they also beat Manual 49-12. Manual, who's been a pretty decent team, but not necessarily a playoff team, so to speak, but they beat them 49-12, and their tough losses started off early this season with losses to Burlington 34-10 and then losing to Buena Vista 39-35, as we mentioned earlier with Buena Vista. But Platte Valley, they're still a team to look out for. They've been in 2A for a long time, and they're down to 1A. It's not all sunshines and rainbows like it has been for Forge Christian, but Platte Valley still made it into the playoffs. And my projection for this upcoming matchup, I have Lyman over Platte Valley in a very, very close one. Probably closer than a lot of people will expect it to be. I have Lyman eking it out over Platte Valley 27-24. Gideon has Lyman over Platte Valley 28-0 in a shutout win. Cody has Lyman in a shutout win over Platte Valley as well, this time 42-0. And then Simon also with a shutout win, Lyman over Platte Valley 28-0. I don't know. I think Platte Valley will fight. They had some games to kind of get it right back on track. Lyman is not a pushover team though, so they will have to fight hard if they want to stay in the playoffs. But that will do it for me in this playoff preview. I cannot wait to see all these guys and all these teams go head to head. It's going to be an amazing road to see who will end up this year's state champs in 1A Colorado high school football. So we'll see you all next week with the results and continue on from there. Have a great one, everyone.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. This is Gideon today, and we are going to be going over the Week 10 results. So I don't know how we're already at Week 10 from the 2A classification. We are also going to be going over the playoff picture for Round 1, so in order to condense this as much as possible, I'm going to just go over the scores of the games for non-playoff teams, and then go more in-depth on the stats for teams that have qualified for the postseason, all 16 of them. Before I do start, though, I do want to congratulate all of the teams that competed this season. I know that not all of them have qualified for the postseason, but I just want to say that every single person that put their heart out there on those fields deserves their flowers. You all have done a lot of work this year, and even if it did not end the way that you wanted it to, you're still a warrior, and this state is proud of you. Now, when we are looking at these games from Week 10, first, we're going to start with our Thursday matchups. First one that we're going to look at is that between Alameda and Lincoln. Alameda, no stats for this one yet. Alameda would end up winning 74-0 over Lincoln. Next up would be Resurrection Christian defeating University 30-22. I'm just going to say Hunter Hansen, great season here for Resurrection Christian, 161 rushing yards and a touchdown. And then really just a good season here for Res Christian. Jackson Lucas, 2 picks in this game, but all around, unfortunately for Res, that's the way it went. University, their season got derailed by the injury of Brevin Doss. I feel like with him, they would have made the playoffs and would have won a couple more league games, but ultimately University still had a good season. Next, though, we have Wellington, who are currently the 9 seed in the playoffs. They are going to be facing off. Well, they faced off with Valley and ended up winning that one 64-36. Now, Valley, ultimately, Carson Adolph, 5 for 18 passing for a touchdown and 2 picks, along with 128 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Austin Moya for the Vikings, 107 rushing yards and 1 touchdown. Leader on defense was Brady Herman, the freshman, with 5 tackles. And then Noah Sarchett, 2 picks, and Logan Iske with 1 interception in this game. Ultimately, solid game here from Valley. They scored more than I thought they would in this game, and ultimately ended up closing the season strong against a good team. For Wellington, though, Cash Altschwager, 12 carries for 358 yards and 4 touchdowns. Kyle Kistner with 127 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Zeke Schroll with 99 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. As well as on defense, the leader, Ethan Thurnes, 9 tackles. Matt Brown, Anijah Gardner, Tanner Smith, and Brandon Van Dyke, all with 6 tackles. Logan Roberts and Thurnes each had a sack, while both Seamus Pike and Houston Willite had interceptions here. And so we are going to need to keep an eye on Wellington here, looking at the playoffs. Next, we have Manitou Springs versus Banning Lewis Preparatory Academy. Neither of these teams ended up in the playoffs. Manitou, though, ended up winning this one 34-0. And the Stangs just did a great job here. They forced 3 interceptions, only 125 passing yards, and 7 total rushing yards over the course of this game by Banning Lewis. Both of these teams' seasons are over, but both were hard fought. Next up, we have Brush falling to the Academy 14-22. The Academy is actually, I believe, the 15 seed, so congratulations for the Wildcats on your return here to the playoffs. The Academy will be facing Basalt in the first round. We'll cover that more here later. For the Academy, though, Jace Farmer, 2 for 8 passing for no touchdowns, no picks. Mr. Chatterton, 0 for 1 passing for interception. Jacob Arsberger, 122 rush yards and 2 touchdowns. Farmer with a rushing touchdown. And then looking at the defensive side of the ball, Andre Mendoza was actually the leader with 13 tackles. Arsberger with 10. Mr. Grotkin with 9 and 2 for loss. Heath Allen with 6. And then Amador Lopez, the freshman, with 6 tackles as well. Arsberger and Lucas Goebel each had a sack, and Lopez did have an interception in this game to seal it for, well, not to seal it, but part of what sealed it for the Academy over Brush. Next up, we would have Strasbourg winning the Battle of the Bridge against Bennett 28-6. Or 30. Well, 28-6 was at the end of the first quarter. 35-6 was the final score, but ultimately we do not have stats for this one. Strasbourg, though, did snag the 1 seed, so we will discuss that here in just a moment when we go over the playoff picture. Next up, we have Delta, who is currently sitting at the 8 seed. They will be facing off with Wellington in the first round at home. Delta ended up winning against Coleridge 22-7. Coleridge, Dylan Miller, 182 pass yards, 1 touchdown to 3 picks. Then Ethan Sanchez, 155 receiving yards and 1 touchdown in the air. Grayson Eisenhart with 15 tackles. Angel Hernandez with 12. Evan Duca and Tayson Collard each with 11, along with Carter Kuhn. And then Diego Gomez with an interception, and then Angel Hernandez with a forced fumble and a recovery. And Evan Duca, 3 kickoff returns for 78 yards, and that's really it here for Coleridge. Ended up just outside of the playoffs here in that 20-ish seed. So, congratulations on a good season, Coleridge, and I wish we could have seen y'all go farther, but keep on doing what y'all are doing down there. Looking at Delta's stats, though, Ty Reed, 4 for 19 on completions for 39 yards, no touchdowns to 1 pick. Nay So with 164 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Reed also 75 rushing yards and 2 scores on the ground. That was a very rush-heavy performance for the reigning champs, looking to get back in the mix there. Alex McKenna was the leading tackler here with 12, Jordan Frazier with 8, Rip Lockhart with 7, and then Dylan Gordon with 6. In terms of sacks, the leader was Jordan Frazier with 1, who also Alex McKenna had 1. Alonzo Huerta and Deacon Sheen each had an interception in this matchup. And then in terms of, it says that McKenna here also got a safety, which certainly must have been demoralizing for Coleridge. So, very good game here by Delta to end up securing their spot as a home seed for the first round of the playoffs. Now, this next game is between 2 different playoff teams, Pagosa Springs and Alamosa. Now, Alamosa has secured the 12 seed and will be playing against Lamar in the first round. Alamosa, by the way, ended up winning this game 14-8. And Pagosa Springs secured the 14 seed and will be traveling to Colorado Springs to play the Classical Academy. So, Pagosa does not have stats uploaded for this game yet, but Alamosa does. And Dyson Woodward, 4 for 6 passing for 30 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Woodward also 22 carries for 180 yards. Zane Zook with 18 carries for 103 yards and a touchdown. No defensive stats as of yet. Ryan Higuereta, 2 for 2 on PATs here. Just Alamosa came out on top of the Pirates and did not let go. So both of these teams have a spot in the playoffs. We'll talk about them more here in a minute. Next up, we do have another matchup with 2 playoff teams. That's going to be number 6, Berthoud, and number 13, Eaton. Now, Berthoud would win this one, 33-15 over the Reds. Starting with Eaton here, Andrew Lloyd, 9 for 21 passing for 124 yards, 2 touchdowns to 1 pick. Liam Wallen, 20 carries for 57 yards on the ground. And then Max Blaskowski, the receiving leader for the Reds, 40 yards. And then Eli Madaleno, 2 receptions for 27 yards and 2 touchdowns there, the only scorer for Eaton. No defensive stats for Eaton as of yet, but all around just a good game here from the Reds to try to get into it here against Berthoud, but it just didn't really work out for them. Now, looking at Berthoud here, though, Skylar Stryker, 14 for 26 for 288 yards, 3 touchdowns to no interceptions. Elisha Mosher on the ground, 43 rushing yards, while in the air, Jaden Michaelis, 104 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. Mr. Anderson with a touchdown as well, and then Weston Petrowski, 59 receiving yards and a score. On defense, the leader was Ethan Hoffmeister with 14 tackles, 3 for loss. Cole Bialek with 11. Ben Schroeder with 11 and 4 for loss. Elisha Mosher with 10 and 4 for loss. Sam Smith with 10 tackles. A lot of guys here doing well. Benjamin Schroeder also 2 sacks in this game. 1 hurry. Elisha Mosher with a sack as well. 1 pick here by Sam Smith, saying, "Won't you stay with me this season?" He probably hears jokes about the artist Sam Smith a lot. Michaelis, 1 kickoff return for 51 yards in this one. And then Elisha Mosher also forced a safety over the course of this game. Schroeder here, 1 fumble recovery touchdown, 4 for 4 on PATs, and 1 for 1 on field goals for a long of 15. Very, very good game here by Ben Schroeder to end out the season against Eaton. Next up, we have another 2 non-playoff teams, Moffat County versus Middle Park. We don't have, we do have stats for Middle Park here. The most impressive stat of this bunch was Mr. Salyards, the quarterback, 205 passing yards for 2 touchdowns to 2 picks. But Middle Park would end up losing to Moffat County 12-27 here. Next up, we have Gunnison, who would defeat Salida 43-27. The most impressive stat line here is Graydon Buchanan from Gunnison, who was 1 for 1 passing for 63 yards and a touchdown, had 152 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and 4 tackles to get the Cowboys their 3rd straight win of the season over Salida. A very good win here by Gunnison to get, not over 500, but over 330, But, yeah, you kind of hope for a better overall season if you are Gunnison, but they did start to put it together there at the end. Next up, we have 1 playoff team facing against a non-playoff team. We have Woodland Park versus La Junta. The Panthers of Woodland Park would come out on top, 34-6. No stats for La Junta so far, but for Woodland Park, Marcus Joseph Schoenberger, 11 for 20 passing for 190 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Trey Reed, 88 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. You also have Parker Shreve, 107 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns in the air, while Aiden Hood, Ben Summerall each had 8 tackles. Shreve had 7. Schoenberger had 5, along with Mateo Pizarro. And then also you had Pizarro with a sack. Nathan Summerall with an interception, Schoenberger with 2 pass deflections, and then Miles Wiley, 1 for 2 on PATs, 1 for 4 on field goals, which isn't great, a long of 29 on those. And so, overall, good game here from Woodland Park to stay strong here in the playoffs. They're currently the 7 seed and will be facing Sterling, the 10 seed, in the first round here. Next up, we have the 2 seed in Basalt defeating Aspen 35-21. Aspen, they put up a good fight, scored in every quarter but the third, but could not overcome the Basalt Longhorns here. Now, Calvin Delaney from Aspen, very good game, 10 for 20 passing for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dylan Micah, 121 rushing yards, and then just all around here, good game here by the skiers. Chile Smart, 12 tackles, Landon Thurber with 11, Andrew Palmaz with 10, Alex Lessinger Hall with 8. You can't be mad, really, with this game. It just is what it is here for Aspen. They put up a good fight all season and honestly kept Kent Denver out of the playoffs entirely. For Basalt, though, Mr. Schneider, 9 for 13 passing for 166 yards, 2 touchdowns in the air. William Daniel, 138 rush yards and 1 touchdown. Will Tarallo with 100 rush yards and 1 score. Receiving, contrary to usual, Will Daniel, 112 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. Taylor Hayes, 55 receiving yards and 1 score as well. On defense, Daniel, 14 total tackles with 2 for loss. Mr. Ricano with 7. Connor Antz with 5 and 1 for loss. And then Daniel also forced a fumble along with Cody Barton. Those were recovered by Barton and Ricano. And then all around, just a good game here by the Basalt Longhorns, staying in the playoffs, staying in that top 5 seed. William Daniel getting it done on both sides of the ball, being the guy for this Basalt team. Our next matchup also had a playoff team in it. This was Montezuma Cortez defeating Bayfield 43-0. Now Montezuma Cortez, well, we don't have stats for this game yet, but Montezuma Cortez just absolute dominance over the course of this game. It was 22-0 for the Panthers at halftime, and then just kept her rolling to beat the Bayfield Wolverines here pretty handily. Now, next up we have Sterling versus Weld Central. The Tigers of Sterling High School would come out on top of the Rebels of Weld Central by a score of 35-14. No stats or score tracker on this one, but we do see that Sterling was up 20-14 at the end of the first half, but then scored 15 unanswered points in the second half to make it 35-14 over Weld Central. Next up, we have TCA defeating Mitchell 65-0. TCA is the 3 seed in this playoffs. Now, TCA, they went to Alex Gould instead of Andrew Brown here. Gould, 9 for 11 passing for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rushing, Braden Godoy, 50 rushing yards and 1 score. Mr. Schipfer, 44 yards and 3 touchdowns. Grant Keaton with 37 yards and 2 scores. In the air, Elijah Wright with 62 receiving yards and 1 touchdown, and then Gould with 23 yards and 1 score as well, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure who Gould would have caught those 3 passes from, but we shall see how exactly that works. On defense, the leader was Henry Hoyman with 10 tackles. Sam Newman and Andrew Richens with a sack apiece. Forced fumble here by Godoy along with recovery. Recovery is also by Elijah Fowen and Jackson Smetana. And then Kai Veronin, 8 kickoffs, 4 touchbacks. And then Zach Mediavia with 120 kick return yards in this one. 1 safety from Smetana. And all around, just a good game here by TCA. Kai Veronin, 2 for 2 on PATs. Nathaniel Thorne, 7 for 7 on PATs. I don't know what they're doing with that special team situation, but I guess it works. Next up, we have Lamar here. They would end up beating Florence 34-14. Lamar up 21-0 at half, so it was basically over. Lamar has secured the 5 seed and will be playing Alamosa in the first round. Now, Jacob Dunning for the Thunder, 23 for 32 passing for 345 yards, 5 touchdowns to no picks. Davier Martinez with 34 rushing yards on the ground. Cale Buxton, 162 receiving yards and a touchdown. Alex Williams with 83 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And then the other 2 from Kason Pollard and Adriel Gonzalez. On defense, Diego Estrada was the leader with 14. Martinez with 9. Maverick Medina with 9 as well. Axton Morales and Kason Pollard each with 8 tackles here for the Thunder. And just a good game here from Lamar to keep things rolling here. Morales, for some reason, taking over for Alex Aguilar. 4 for 5 on PATs. And yeah, just good game here from the Thunder to secure a win over the Huskies and secure the 5 seed in the playoffs. Next up, Neither of the following teams are going to make the playoffs. Both are pretty well outside. Englewood, though, would end up defeating Platte Canyon 49-6. No stats on this one, but good season to both. Next up, we have Elizabeth keeping Kent Denver out of the playoffs with a 28-21 win. No stats on this one yet, but geez, Elizabeth just coming out on top and making sure that Kent Denver stays outside. And Elizabeth, good overall game here, but Elizabeth would secure the 4 seed with that win over Kent Denver. Now, the last playoff team that we're going to be talking about, Denver West, would actually fall to Davelin 14-36, end up finishing the season 7-2. But Denver West, no stats on this one yet. Kind of surprising, actually, with how dominant they'd been for most of the season. But Denver West has secured the 16 seed. They will be playing Strasburg in the first round. But the Cowboys have made their first playoffs since 1995. Since 1995, that was the last time that the Denver West Cowboys made the playoffs. So congratulations to the Cowboys for that achievement. And finally, last matchup that we are going to discuss, we have Fort Lupton defeating Arvada 46-6. No stats for Arvada yet. But for Fort Lupton, the most impressive performance, in my mind at least, has to go to, I'm going to give it to Gage Hofferber. 15 carries for 169 yards, 11.3 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns, and just all around good game here. 1 catch for 4 yards as well. And then on defense, 5 total tackles with 2 for loss for Hofferber. Good game here from the senior. Unfortunately, that's going to do it for his career, along with the careers of guys like Giovanni Carlton and Jesse Soretto. Royce Guerrero, I'm not fully sure what happened to him, but it is sad to see Fort Lupton go. But all around, that is it for our regular recap. Now it is time to launch into our playoff picture with teams with seeds 1-16, and I will be going over the first round of the playoffs next week. I'll go over the second round and my predictions, but we're going to get to that here right now. Now, looking at the playoff picture, just going to run through this first by matchup, and then we're going to talk about the previews here a little bit. Number 1 seed Strasburg is going to face number 16 Denver West, and then the winner of that game will face the winner of number 9 Wellington versus number 8 Delta. Next we have number 4 Elizabeth playing against number 13 Eaton, who will face the winner of number 5 Lamar versus number 12 Alamosa. At the top of the other side of the bracket, we have number 2 Basalt versus number 15 The Academy, number 7 Woodland Park versus number 10 Sterling, then number 6 Berthoud hosting number 11 Montezuma Cortez, and number 3 The Classical Academy versus number 14 Pagosa Springs. I'm going to get through some of these easier matchups first, starting with Denver West versus Strasburg. Now, Strasburg, they're chilling at 8-1 right now, while Denver West is at 7-2. But now, the stats here look pretty comparable. You got Freddie Lucero, Marcelo Ortiz, Robert Whitkey, and Aries Jung here for Denver West that have all been doing pretty well. And then for Strasburg, you have Aiden Dodge, Brody Hopwood, you got Mason Dickens, Juan Fernandez, all those different fellas. But here's the thing. In the common opponent that these two schools share, and this demonstrates the difference in these teams and their strength of schedule, the common opponent here is Englewood. Strasburg beat Englewood by a score of 35-0, which is pretty respectable. Denver West also beat Englewood, but that was by a score of 12-6. 12-6. Denver West also started the season with a comeback win over Prospect Ridge Academy. Prospect Ridge was up 15-0. Denver West did end up winning that 35-15, but even though, again, congratulations Denver West for your first playoff since 1995, I just can't in good conscience say that I think Denver West is going to win this game. But still, a really good season here from the Cowboys, one that they should be proud of. Next up, though, we have the 15 seed taking on the 9 seed, the Academy versus Basalt. There is one common opponent here in Arvada. Basalt, they ended up winning this one 40-8, and then the Academy beat Arvada. That one was 63-18. And so, in my mind, I would say that honestly, this kind of does tell a good story, because even though the Academy does have a pretty solid offense, they've had guys like Andre Mendoza who have won Playmaker of the Week so far this year. I trust Basalt's defense much more, and Basalt has just beat much better teams than the Academy. The Academy, they are 6-3 right now. Basalt is at 9-0. Looking at the Academy's schedule, lost to Forge Christian, lost to Strasburg, and a loss to Sterling. The rest of these games are wins, but they played close against Fort Lupton, who were pretty bad this year. They played close against Brush, who were without their best player and pretty bad this year. Allowed Arvada to be pretty close. Some of these wins look good. Weld Central, Skyview. But at any time they come up against a team that is on the level that Basalt has been proven to be on this year with that win over Delta, which is their best win of the year. They've beat Glenwood, Delta, Coal Ridge, Aspen. I could theoretically see it happening, but I'm just not. I do not have confidence in the Academy here. I'm glad that they made it back. I'm surprised that they made it to the playoffs, but I do not think that the Academy is going to win this game against Basalt, and Basalt will likely advance to the second round to face the winner of Woodland Park versus Sterling. Oh, and by the way, I believe that Strasburg will advance to face the winner of Delta versus Wellington. Next, we're going to have a Wellington versus Delta, the 8 versus 9 seed matchup. Both of these teams are 7-2 as of right now. Now, there are no common opponents between these two squads, but here's the thing. I think Wellington, talent-wise, is underseeded. Now, in terms of pure what they put out on the field this season and record, this is close to the correct seed. But in terms of pure talent, I think they could beat anyone in this state. At least on a 2A level. I think that when all cylinders are firing, this is a team that could. They were just a couple plays away from being undefeated this year. So, in my mind, I like Ty Reed, I like Naso. I just am not sure who on this team is going to stop Tanner Gray. I'm not sure who's going to stop Cash Altschwager. I know that they've been talking about bringing back Tanner McLean for the playoffs and making sure that if everyone is healthy on this squad, like Ezra Bat-Jargle, Canyon Breed. Wellington has beat teams that are better than Delta has been this year. And again, when healthy, I'm just not sure that I see. I don't see Wellington losing those games. So, we've got the losses for Delta here are Palisade and Basalt, with wins over Gunnison, Rifle, Alamosa, Middle Park, Aspen, Moffat County, and Coal Ridge. Honestly, I think the best win on this schedule overall is probably over Aspen. Either Aspen or Alamosa. But yeah, I don't think that anybody on this schedule that they have actually beaten is on Wellington's level. Now, you can argue about Basalt and Palisade and what type of team they are, but in my mind, I think Wellington probably wins this one more often than not, depending on health. I'm going to give this to them with a score of probably like 21-14. A close game. Don't get me wrong, but I think Wellington probably wins that. Next up, we're going to have number 5, Lamar, against number 12, Alamosa. Now, Lamar, I'm just going to say this now. I think Lamar wins this by at least 2 scores. I'm going to say 35-21 here. Now, Alamosa, they do have a little bit of firepower behind them here. 6-3, with their only losses being to Pueblo Central, Delta, and Montezuma Cortez. But Lamar, only loss is to Woodland Park, common opponent in Banning Lewis Academy. Both of these teams beat Banning Lewis by 50+. But Lamar Lamar hasn't been the best team in the state. They do have that loss to Woodland. They haven't played the toughest teams in the world, but they're beating a team like Raton. They're beating Sterling. They're beating Burlington. This league outside of Woodland is weak. But in all reality, this is a team with more quality wins than Alamosa has. Now, Alamosa, don't get me wrong, they do have a couple of good wins in here. The one against Pagosa Springs that came just last week is the one that comes to mind at the top of my head. Is that's a win that you can hang your hat on. But I just don't see the Mean Moose winning this game, because they're going to have to drive to Lamar, which knowing that drive, you're going to have to go through Canyon City, through Salida, through Canyon City, get over through Pueblo, and then go through La Junta all the way out to Lamar, which is at least a 3.5-hour drive. Which, they haven't been doing well with this year. That's why they lost that Montezuma Cortez game. Their best performances here have been when they go to away games, they're not doing too hot. Against Pueblo Central, Delta, both of those are losses. At Montezuma Cortez, that's a loss. At Bayfield, they only win that one by 9 points, so that's really only 2 possessions. And then at Salida's not a very good team this year. So this is a team that does best at home, and they're going to have to go to Lamar. So with how good Lamar has been, and with their quality wins, and with, if I'm being completely honest, superior quarterback play, because Jacob Dunning is 29 touchdowns to 4 picks this year. No, I'm going to give this to Lamar. Yeah, I'm going to give this to Lamar. I think Alamosa will come within 2 scores of Lamar, but this one will ultimately come down to which team has the better quarterback play, and that is definitely the Lamar Thunder. Now, the next one is going to be number 4, Elizabeth, versus number 13, Eaton. Eaton sits at 5-4 right now, while Elizabeth is at 7-2. Now, these two teams, they do have one common opponent in the Classical Academy. Both teams lost to TCA. Eaton lost 28-14, and Elizabeth lost 35-20 here. Now, this is a tough situation, and I believe this game is going to be extremely close. Andrew Lloyd, he's done a good job stepping in here for Connor Davey. Liam Wallen has done a good job this season. Max Blaskowski is a pretty good wide receiver. But for Elizabeth, I'm going to pick them in this game. I think the final score will be something like 24-21, and I'll pick them for this reason, and it's the same reason I picked them over Kent Denver last week. They just have a much better line. Eaton, when they played against Wellington, Eaton's line was just getting dominated. And, I mean, Wellington has got a good line. They've got a big line. They don't have the biggest line. And looking at it from Elizabeth's side, on the D-line, on the O-line, you've got guys like Tim Waters. But on the D-line, you've got both Drake Brinkworth, who's like 6'8", and you've got Caden Long, who is one of the state's sack leaders. I personally don't know who on Eaton will stop that. Now, of course, there's always the element of Eaton and their experience, because at Eaton, anything short of a championship is failure. And these are guys who have been conditioned for success. They've made it far. They made it far in the playoffs last year. Some of these guys that are left are some of the last guys from that three-peat championship run. I will not say that Eaton cannot win this game. I will not count out the Eaton Reds as long as they are playing. But this year they look more mortal than they did last year, arguably. And I will put on upset alert, but I do still give this to Elizabeth about 55 times out of 100. So I say Elizabeth wins this probably 24-21. I'll give this to the Cardinals, and I think they will play Lamar in the second round. Next up, we have Sterling traveling to play Woodland Park. The Tigers going on to play the Panthers, a battle of the big cats, if you will. This is a matchup between the 7 seed and the 10 seed. Now for Sterling, they are 8-1 with the only loss being to Lamar, 30-22 there. And then Woodland Park, perfect regular season win over Lamar's, their best looking one right now. But they also have wins over Lincoln, Salida, CSCS, Rye, Banning Lewis, Florence, Manitou, and La Junta. The rest of Sterling's wins, by the way, are over Valley, Banning Lewis, Platte Valley, the Academy, Brush, Arvada, Fort Lupton, and Weld Central. Now, in my opinion, both of these leagues are equally bad, but Sterling have played more playoff teams. They beat 15 seed the Academy 33-10, but the Tigers and Panthers, they do actually have those two common opponents in Woodland Park and Banning Lewis. And now, here's the way I see it. I do think that Woodland Park will make this one close. And overall, I do think Woodland Park will pull out the slight win. Now, the reason that I say that is because, well, Woodland Park, I think they're just all around bigger and more physical. I think that's the way I want to phrase that. And Sterling, they are good. They have really good skill position players, but I'm not fully confident about the line up in Sterling. And so with that on top of the drive, I know they have to make that drive every time they go to play a game. But ultimately, Woodland, I feel like, is a uniquely hostile environment for opposing teams, both with the increase in altitude that you're going to experience going from Sterling to that, but also in terms of how do I say this politely? Uh, it's not exactly a great place to be outside of certain circumstances. So they're a tough team. They're a scrappy team. I think that, Carter Yeager and company are probably going to be on top in this one when it's all said and done. Now we're going to need to see how all the different factors end up playing out. I do think that defensively I have a bit more confidence in Sterling here, but offensively Marcus Schoenberger's done a great job captaining this Woodland Park team, so I just barely give it to the Panthers here. Next, we have Montezuma Cortez traveling to Berthoud. Unfortunately, I don't fully think that this one is going to be very close. There are no common opponents, surprisingly. That was actually complete sarcasm. Montezuma Cortez and Berthoud are just about as far away from each other as two teams can be in this state. They are extremely far apart, but Berthoud overall, they just have wins against better teams, really. Montezuma Cortez's best win so far this season that I can put my finger on and say, yes, that is a good quality contest, was against Alamosa, who's the 12 seed, lost to Strasbourg at home even, which is not great considering the natural advantage they have being that far out. Win over Gunnison, win over Salida, win over Gallup, win over Crown Point, win over Shiprock. I think that Montezuma Cortez could have done well with a couple more in-state games. Strasbourg being the only one is not a great look. Or only out of conference in-state game. But I think that Bayfield as the closing win is a good win. I'm glad that this Montezuma Cortez team made the playoffs, but I think that they're going to lose to Berthoud. And I mean, Berthoud, they are 7-2 as well, but those two losses are to Thompson Valley and Resurrection Christian. Res Christian almost made the playoffs, and that one was only by 5. Win over University, beating a quality playoff Eaton team, beating, granted, no Tanner Gray in this game, but still ended up beating Wellington. You go to Moffat County's house and beat them by 40, beat Weld Central, and beat a 3A Coronado team. Now, I think that Thompson Valley, who Berthoud was within one score of, would beat Montezuma Cortez by 50. And so ultimately I do think that Berthoud will win this game. I think I may be there depending on how the matchups look that night. I do want to see Tay Wheat in person. I want to see what this Montezuma Cortez line looks like. But I think I am going to have to go with Berthoud in that matchup to face the winner of the Classical Academy and Pagosa Springs. Speaking of the Pirates and the Titans, the Pirates, they are sitting at the 14 seed, while the Titans are sitting at the 3 seed. Pagosa 5-4, TCA 9-0. Pagosa this year with a win over Kirtland Central, loss to Centauri, win over Mont Vista, Elizabeth, Salida, and Montezuma Cortez, and 3 losses against Bayfield, Gunnison, and Alamosa. Those Bayfield and Gunnison losses make no sense. Really no sense at all, especially because they had 8 days to prepare for Gunnison, of all teams. That's their worst loss of the season somehow. Pagosa is a tough team, but the thing is, they, outside of their normal opponents, have not had to travel for any of their games. They've had to go to Salida, you have to go to Gunnison. Those are the drives they're used to making. These guys are not used to going to the Springs. They're not used to that at all. Now, Eaton or Pagosa Springs, they do have good players. You got a Jackson Shield, you got a Seth Ziegler, but all around, I just don't really see how they beat TCA. Because TCA, they've beat in their out of conference schedule some quality squads. You beat Eaton, you beat Elizabeth. La Junta was solid, but the only bad thing about TCA is that their conference schedule is dog water. Like, this is one of the worst conference schedules for a contender that I've seen. Wins over Lincoln, Denver West, Alameda, DeEvelyn, and Mitchell. And I know that the players over there hate it too, so I do think that there's a chance, a very, very slight chance that Pagosa gets within one score, and then at that point anything can happen, because Pagosa has had a much tougher conference schedule than TCA has. I'm not going to put TCA on upset alert, but I do think that it could happen. But Pagosa, I do think, loses this. They're just on a bad skid right now for some reason. On that weird 1-3 in their last 4 games. I don't get that, especially against the teams that they've lost to, like Bayfield and Gunnison. I don't understand that, but I do think that ultimately TCA will advance to play the winner of Berthoud Montezuma Cortez. And so what it looks like is, I think Strasburg will beat Denver West, and Delta will be beaten by Wellington. Elizabeth will beat Eaton, Lamar will beat Alamosa, Basalt will beat the Academy, Woodland Park will beat Sterling, Berthoud will beat Montezuma Cortez, and TCA will beat Pagosa. I know it's all the higher seeds, but for me, a lot of these teams have just played some of the same squads, and one team did better than the other. But also, like, Wellington is a good team. They just had bad injury luck this season. Elizabeth, they've got a much better line than Eaton does. Lamar, they have a better quarterback. Basalt, just all-around dominance. Woodland Park, I think they barely win it. Berthoud, I think the drive might kill Montezuma Cortez's energy a little bit. And then with TCA, weak league schedule, but Pagosa's had some baffling losses recently. So I think in the second round, it'll be Berthoud versus TCA, Basalt versus Woodland Park again, Elizabeth versus Lamar, and Strasburg versus Wellington. And that'll do it for me. I will see you all here again next week. You can catch me here on the Playmakers Corner podcast, but make sure to stay tuned for more of what happened this past week in Colorado 3A, 4A, and 5A football, along with 1A if you didn't listen to that already. And if you are thirsty, go get a drink. Don't get dehydrated. Make sure that you are keeping your eyes on the road if you're driving. And make sure that you're having a good day. Try to get some joy into your days. That's always going to be fun. But listen, you all have a great day. Stay safe. And I will talk to you all soon. Stay frosty, and peace out.
All right, Coach V here, and I got your 3A recap for the second to last week of the regular season here in 2024. We got games from October 31st, Halloween, all the way to, R1 on Saturday, November 2nd. So let's go ahead and hop into this one. First things first, we got Palisade versus Eagle Valley. A lot of playoff implications here. Eagle Valley really needing a win here to have as good a chance as possible to make it, but Palisade wins 43-0, possibly dashing their playoff hopes. We'll see how it all ends up in the end. But Easton Embry, a big game, 7 carries, 196 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Cade Carter with 90 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Dylan Larson with 32 rushing yards and a touchdown. Also Larson with a receiving touchdown there as Palisade takes care of Eagle Valley. Moving on, we got Pueblo East versus Coronado, and this one was not close. East takes care of business, 47-16. As of today, November 3rd, no stats for them, but for Coronado, we have a couple of stats here. Thomas Buckmiller, 24-40 for 385 passing yards, 2 touchdowns to 3 picks, though. Zen Groves with 153 yards and a touchdown, and Hank Kelly with 178 yards and a touchdown in this one, but obviously a loss for them. Thompson Valley then plays Roosevelt, and Thompson Valley squeaks by here, winning 28-21. It was tied in the third here, and then Thompson Valley would score 14, or would outscore Roosevelt 14-7 in the fourth. Going to the stats here, Thompson Valley's Finley Lucas, 3 of 8, 38 yards. On offense here, Tristan Hill, 82 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. Hendrickson, the senior, 80 rushing yards. Uritia, the other senior, with 62 yards, and Finley Lucas with 2 rushing touchdowns to add on there. On defense, Landry Suarez led with 10 tackles, and then he also had a sack. You also have Seth Castle with 2 sacks and CJ James with a sack as well in this close win. For Roosevelt, 2 quarterbacks played in this one. Josiah Ramirez, 8 of 15, 154 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Jackson Craig, 5 of 10 for 74 yards and a touchdown here. Not much really going here. In the running game, Luke Vigil, only 26 rushing yards in this one. But receiving-wise, Noah Lucero led with 6 receptions for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. Defensively, Dylan Langley co-led with Cason Lopez with 8 tackles. And then this defense did have 4 sacks, but just fell short to Thompson Valley. Moving on, we have Summit versus Skyview. Summit playing their first game here, or sorry, not the first game back. They played Conifer last week, but the week before they forfeited to Green Mountain. Against Skyview, they would beat them though 28-7. Mountain View would then play Severance, and Severance would win 22-0. This is a big win for Severance, as it does help their playoff resume a lot here, in my opinion. For Mountain View, this is a tough loss to take, especially because they got shut out here in this game. Cam Frost, the junior, 8 of 24, 70 passing yards here. Not much going on the ground or really anywhere else outside of that, as they weren't able to score. Bear Plews, the junior, with 17 tackles, but that's about it. Severance shuts out Mountain View. Holy Family then takes care of Hinckley, 68-0. Not too much more to say here. They're able to run the ball really well. Anthony Scott, 63 yards, 3 touchdowns. Sebastian True with 2 touchdowns. Brendan Ward with 1 33-yard rushing touchdown. They take care of Holy Family takes care of Hinckley, 68-0. Northridge then does the same to Niwot, 58-14 here. Justin Thill with his best game, one of his best games of the year, 14 of 30, 223 yards, 5 touchdowns. And then you have the sophomore Jermaine Wilson Jr., 17 carries for 152 yards and 3 touchdowns as they take care of Niwot. Then we have Pueblo Central versus Sierra. Central wins this one 48-14. Gennaro Pino, 7 of 10, 201 yards and 3 touchdowns. Mari Brown, 150 rushing yards on 3 carries and 2 touchdowns. And Aiden Hassel, 3 carries for 102 yards and a touchdown there. Mari Brown with 178-yard touchdown. And then Ernest Matson with 3 for 78 and a touchdown. And Joseph Castro, 243 for a touchdown there. For Sierra, they continue to struggle here. Jaden Falloon, 3 of 7 for 80 yards and a touchdown for the junior quarterback. And then that's pretty much it there. So there you go. Those are your Halloween games from October 31st, Thursday. Let's go ahead and go to November 1st, Friday. We have a lot of games here from this day, but let's just go ahead and hop into it, starting with Green Mountain versus Conifer. Green Mountain wins 56-34. Some scoring still by Conifer there, which makes it interesting, but Just some stats to look over for Green Mountain. Simon Lunsford, 18 of 28, 340 yards, 4 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Villalobos was their leading rusher with 87 yards. Their lead receiver was Dax Gomez, 2 for 88 and a touchdown. Corbin Wade was also up there, though, 3 receptions for 88 yards. You have Aiden Beeson not far behind, 2 for 81. And then receiving touchdowns to Demetrius Padilla, Drew Contreras, Drennan Dowell, and Villalobos as they take care of business against Confer, kind of allowing a lot of points, but still winning regardless. Stanley Lake wins regardless over Kennedy, 42-0 here. Liam Graham, 7 carries, 98 yards, 3 touchdowns as he leads them in that dub. You have DCC playing Palmer. No stats for either team, but DCC wins 56-8. They win big there. Harrison would then play Pueblo Centennial. They would take care of business here, 44-14. For Harrison, Josiah Evans led in rushing, 64 yards, 2 touchdowns. You also had Gulan Kraft with a touchdown. Hamin Yimana, the junior quarterback, with a touchdown. And then Dayon Mock with a touchdown as well as they take care of Centennial. Pueblo County would then play Canyon City, and they would win a close one, 28-21. A touchdown in the fourth, giving them the lead. Cohen Glenn, 16 of 23, 202 passing yards, 42 rushing yards, and a touchdown. Patrick Naga, 8 for 128 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Also had 6 receptions for 93 yards. That is a Playmaker of the Week type of performance there in a big win against Canyon City. For Canyon City, though, Gavin Reddick, 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Schumacher right behind him with 57 rushing yards in that game. Then we got Windsor versus Meade, a big matchup between two top 5 opponents here. And for Windsor, they started quarterback James Beats here, who the sophomore went 4-5 for 30 yards and a pick, so that's interesting. No Kyle Phelps. Trip Thomas, though, 18 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown in that game as they barely beat Meade. For Meade, Christian Heiner, 4 of 10 for 15 yards. Ethan Elmore, though, had 83 rushing yards and a touchdown. That was their lone one of the day as Windsor edges out Meade. Timnath then plays Greeley Central, and they win big, 38-0 here. Looking at some stats, Vince Hochhalter with a rushing touchdown, Braden Polilla with a touchdown, Kyle Nelson and Davis Payne with a rushing touchdown each in this big-time win. Lewis Palmer then gets by Pueblo South. This is a big win for LP. They beat them 28-6 here. Pueblo South had a 19-point second quarter, but Lewis Palmer would keep it steady here and score in the third to make it 28-19. South would score a touchdown at the end, but it would not matter as LP wins. For South here, Caden Herrera, 14 of 27, 250 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. Chase Hurley, 94 rushing yards, and then Jake Pisciata, 5 receptions, 82 yards. Those are your leaders in that game. Pomona would then blow out Fort Morgan 49-6 here. No real stats from Pomona there. Evergreen would then beat Wheat Ridge here 27-6, and that'll probably put away Wheat Ridge's playoff hopes there for good. Josh Bittner, 3 of 4, 31 yards. He also had 121 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns in that game against Wheat Ridge. Now, moving on to Saturday, November 2nd. There's only one game here. It's Steamboat Springs versus Glenwood Springs here. A key game for both teams as they're trying to make the playoffs. And Steamboat Springs, they beat them 17-6 here. No stats from them. But for Glenwood Springs, Markovich, 10 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown. But only 10 carries there, really 10 touches. So there you go. And then Markovich had a tackle, but Oliver Walls had 14 tackles. That was their lead tackler. But Glenwood Springs would fall short to Steamboat, 17-6. And there you go there. That is your recap for this week.
What is good, y'all? This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and it is time for the final regular season recap in the 4A classification for the 2024 boys football season. We had 6 games on Thursday, 14 on Friday, and only 1 on Saturday. Not a ton of exciting games with a lot of these leagues already decided, but there were definitely some exciting ones here. Let's go ahead and kick it off here with these Thursday games. Starting us off, we have Frederick, who beat Greeley West 59-0 on the road. The MVP of this one, surprise, surprise, was the senior quarterback Gavin Ishmael. He went 16 for 20 for 230 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions. And then rushing the ball, he added 75 yards and a touchdown on 9 carries. For receivers, Tristan Dean led the way here with 5 receptions for 72 yards and a touchdown. Braden Rudman had 3 receptions for 51 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Gisrael Palma had 4 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. On defense, Eric Ross led the team with 10 tackles and a tackle for loss. And then Sam Chambers had a sack. Reno Diguezualdo had an interception, and so did Boone Fisher. Next here, Denver North got the win over Aurora Central 30-13. We don't have any stats in that game, unfortunately, so that moves us to our next game, where Centaurus got the 62-6 win over Thornton at home. No stats for Thornton, but for Centaurus, the sophomore QB Halas Weiss had a huge game, going 20 for 23 for 383 yards and 5 touchdowns. That is definitely what you like to see from a sophomore QB. Who knows what he's going to be putting up against these teams as a junior and senior. For receivers, Tyson Burton led the way here with 6 receptions for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Adisu McCormick had a nice game as well, getting 4 receptions for 86 yards and a touchdown. And then Jax Lewis, Wyatt Miller, Jax Krupe, and Travis Main all had a receiving touchdown in this game. On defense, Cade Martinez had a sack, and then Caleb Thole and Noah Davis both had an interception. That takes us to our next game, where Grand Junction got the win over Sand Creek 34-6 for the I-25 League Championship. Grand Junction will get the league championship and a playoff spot, and this ends Sand Creek's season. For Grand Junction, Will Applegate had 3 touchdowns, 1 passing and then 2 on the ground. Matthias Martinez led the team with 125 yards rushing on 23 carries, and then Noah Watkins and Dusty Harris both had a rushing touchdown. Defensively here, Austin Music led the way with 10 tackles, a tackle for loss, and an interception, and then Colton Music also had an interception here for Grand Junction. Dakota Ridge got the 51-0 shutout win over Bear Creek. Looking at Dakota Ridge stats, Kellen Berenson keeps it rolling, going 13 for 17 for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rushing the ball, Landon Carlsbeck had 4 carries for 119 yards and a touchdown. And then Jackson Arnold and Jack Offerdahl both ran for a touchdown. For receivers, Landon Carlsbeck also caught a touchdown. On defense, Nolan Hartman led the team with 9 tackles. Julian Lopez and Troy McMullen both had sacks, and then Kobe Stewart had an interception. In our last of the Thursday games, Rampart got the big-time win over Air Academy 38-14. The MVP on offense here for Rampart was Camden Bruns with 104 yards and 2 touchdowns on 15 carries. Defensively for Rampart, Camden Bruns also had 13 tackles, which led the team. Nathan Bolyston had 10 tackles and 3 tackles for a loss. And then Justice Derrickson balled out again with 5 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a sack. You also had Braden Worth with a sack, and then Carter Leffler had an interception. Looking at these Friday games now, Golden got the shootout win 50-41 over Highlands Ranch to secure their playoff spot. For Golden, Thatcher Matthews had a great game. He went 15 for 20 for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. And then rushing the ball, he led the way as well with 128 yards and 2 touchdowns on 18 carries. So Matthews doing pretty much everything here for Golden in this win. You also had Colin Meyer, sorry for mispronouncing that there, with 2 rushing touchdowns as well. For receivers, Jack Dixon led the way here, the top receiver for Golden. He had 4 receptions for 114 yards and a touchdown. And then Cooper Needham had 3 receptions for 98 yards and a touchdown. And Bracken McDougal led the team with 7 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown. For defense, Golden balled out, getting 6 sacks as a team. They didn't force any turnovers, but that defensive front balled out against Highlands Ranch in this win. For Highlands Ranch, Crew Garrick went 26 for 47 for 414 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for a touchdown. And then Luke Bakken had 108 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns on 15 carries. For receivers, Timmy Schwab had a huge game, getting 113 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions. And then you had 2 other receivers getting 100 yards, with Jaden Buhia finishing with 107 yards on 12 receptions. And then George West led the team in receiving yards with 124 with a touchdown on 8 receptions. Next year we had a huge game where Montrose gave Pueblo West their first loss of the season. We didn't get any stats for Montrose, but Gavin Lockett went 10 for 16 for 197 yards, 2 touchdowns and an interception. And then rushing the ball, he had 56 yards and a touchdown on 15 carries. The leading receiver was Garrett O'Brien with 2 receptions for 89 yards. And then Zach Duran and Brock Keck both had receiving touchdowns as well. Next year, Ponderosa got the big-time win over Heritage 45-34 in a shootout. For Ponderosa, Coulter Espinoza had a decent game, going 8 for 14 for 111 yards and a touchdown. But it was Al Capone Veazey who balled out here for Ponderosa, leading them to this win. He put up 222 yards and 3 touchdowns on 34 carries. He is the workhorse back for this Ponderosa offense. Moving on now, Northfield got the win over George Washington 40-21 to solidify that league championship for them. Aiden Douglas had 3 rushing touchdowns in this one. He had 3 carries for 99 yards. Cameron Harris had 90 yards on 12 carries and a touchdown. And then Joaquin Oliva had a rushing touchdown as well. On defense, Elian Oliva led the team with 12 tackles, but Dylan Anderson was right behind him with 11. There was no Xavius Chineth, it looks like, in this game. That is quite concerning going into the first round of playoffs, where Northfield will be facing Frederick, and Chineth will be absolutely vital in that game if Northfield wants to win that one. Next year, Durango solidifies their first round bye here in the playoffs with a 20-14 win over Vista Ridge. Coley Feeney had 3 total touchdowns. He had 1 on the ground and 2 through the air. He went 13 for 18 for 113 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. And then on the ground, he had 41 yards and a touchdown on 13 carries. The leading receiver was Sebastian Tripp, getting 2 receptions for 62 yards and a touchdown. And then Mason J. Miller also caught a touchdown. On defense, Wyatt Bartell led the way here with 12 tackles and a tackle for loss. And then Gage Voiles, Nathan Beal, and Julius Arredondo all had 1 sack each. And then Dawson McKinnis had an interception for Durango in this win here. For Vista Ridge, Nyshawn Hall was the main contributor on offense. He had 123 yards and 2 touchdowns on 28 carries. Longmont got a massive win over Adams City on the road, is 62-14. Colby Holmes went crazy in this one, going 19 for 25 for 336 yards and 6 passing touchdowns alongside 0 interceptions. On the ground, Jaden Martinez had 4 carries for 111 yards and a touchdown. And then for receivers, Joey Foote was the one getting most of the production here. He had 216 yards and 3 receiving touchdowns on 10 receptions. And then you also had Reese Odom with a big game here. He had 81 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions. On defense, Edgar Calderon had an interception, and then Ben Starkle led the team with 8 tackles. Mesa Ridge got the 40-14 win over Falcon, and there's no stats in that one, so we will move on now to the Liberty versus Palmer Ridge game, where Palmer Ridge got the 45-6 win over Liberty. Palmer Ridge ran the ball all over Liberty in this one. Carson Campbell had 130 yards and 3 touchdowns on only 3 carries. And then Javier Elvira had 79 yards and a touchdown on 8 carries. On defense, Chaz Connors had an interception, and Derek Zertuch had a forced fumble. Broomfield stomped on Skyline 53-16. Darian Jackson went 5 for 6 for 93 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then C.T. Worley had a 33-yard rushing touchdown. Joseph Larson had a 34-yard rushing touchdown. Keegan Portoff had a 34-yard rushing touchdown as well here. On defense, Walker Susurus had a sack, and Riley Sundrup had an interception. And that takes us to the next game, where Loveland shut out Pooter 35-0 at home. Loveland did a great job rushing the ball here. Deion Christopher had 138 yards and 2 touchdowns on 13 carries. Noah Kubri had 116 yards on 15 carries, and Ryder Easton had 55 yards on 15 carries, while also going 8 for 10 for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns and an interception in the pass game. For receivers, Zane DeSouza had 4 receptions for 30 yards and a touchdown, and Cash Villanueva had 61 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions. Defensively here, Tyler Chadwick led the way with 14 tackles and a tackle for loss, and Cody Moore also had double-digit tackles with 11 and a tackle for loss and a sack. We had a surprisingly close game in our next one here, where Monarch pulled out the win over Silver Creek, 33-31 at home. Riley Montemayor went 16 for 27 for 194 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. And then he also ran for 2 touchdowns, giving him 5 total on the game. For receivers, Tyler Tharp was leading the way with 4 receptions for 47 yards and a touchdown. But we also had Gavin Fagan with 61 yards and a touchdown on 3 receptions. Defensively, Sawyer Haley forced a fumble. For Silver Creek, Nolan Gachetta went 8 for 15 for 185 yards and a touchdown, and David Tan was the main offensive contributor, getting 115 yards and 2 touchdowns on 20 carries. Nolan Gachetta also ran for 61 yards and a touchdown on 16 carries on the ground. For receivers, Jackson Coleman had the 1 receiving touchdown. He had 63 yards and a touchdown on 2 receptions. Next here, Doherty blew out Widefield 52-0 at home. Leland Frescaz went 11 for 18 for 239 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Talon Romick Washington had a huge game. He had 193 yards and 3 touchdowns on 18 carries. For receivers, Jalen Hale by far led the way with 144 yards and a touchdown on 4 receptions. On defense, Gavin R. Gilbert had a sack, and so did Aiden Jenkins. And then Gavin R. Gilbert also had an interception, and Laren Donald had an interception as well. Riverdale Ridge stomped on Grand Junction Central 49-21. For Riverdale Ridge, Isaiah Medina went 10 for 12 for 144 yards and a touchdown. And then they also threw in Jazea Gallegos, who went 5 for 6 for 84 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the ground, Diego Galvin led the way with 173 yards and 3 touchdowns on 18 carries. Defensively, Grayson Mommons had 5 tackles and 3 tackles for loss, and Colton Lancaster had 10 tackles and 2 tackles for loss and a sack. Mommons had 3 sacks in this one, and Drake Presswood had an interception. In our last of the Friday games, Thomas Jefferson got the 59-14 win over Montbello. Thomas Jefferson ran for 7 total touchdowns, with Luke Cooler having 147 yards and 3 touchdowns on 12 carries. Jaleed Coleman had 145 yards and a touchdown on 15 carries. And Sean Lindengren had 100 yards and 3 touchdowns on 12 carries. And that takes us to our one and only Saturday game, where Cheyenne Mountain shut out Gateway 44-0 on the road. The freshman Colt Kugler had 4 carries for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns here. And then for receivers, Tyler Chris had 2 receptions for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns in this win for Cheyenne Mountain. On defense, they had 10 tackles for loss as a team. And then Zach Diaz, Connor Cavini, Donnie Lund, and Giovanni Resto all had 1 sack each. And then you had William Cran and McCoy Huckstep with an interception each. And that will do it here in the final recap of the 2024 boys tackle football season in the 4A classification. This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I will see you all next week after round 1 of the playoffs. What is good, y'all? This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and it is time for the playoff previews in the 4A classification for the 2024 boys tackle football season. I'm going to take some time to go through each team in the first round. So the 8 teams that have a first round bye, I'm going to go ahead and talk about them next week. But for these first round teams, I'm going to talk about a couple of key players, as well as some key wins and key losses. And then after I talk about each team in the matchup, I will give a prediction and my reason why for that prediction for that matchup. And then I will move on to the next matchup. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and move into our first round matchup that we're going to look at. First up here, we have 16-seeded Doherty versus 17-seeded Loveland. Starting us off here, we're going to go ahead and talk about Doherty here. They finished the regular season with a 5-5 record and a 2-3 league record. They were in a very tough league in that SoCo 1 league. We got Falcon in there, Montrose, Pueblo West, and Mesa Ridge. So it definitely was not an easy road for Doherty to get here, but they got to the playoffs, and that's what matters. So let's go ahead and look at some key players here. Starting off here, we got the 6'6", 300-pound tackle/defensive end Maddox Richardson. Richardson is a massive reason why Doherty is able to be so successful in the pass game, and he is also very good blocking in the run game as well. It's very important having someone like Richardson on your offensive line, setting the tone against the more tough defenses that they've had to see in that SoCo 1 league. Richardson is a senior, and the team that they're facing, Loveland, is a very young team, so that experience and physicality that he brings is going to be huge here for Doherty. Next here, we got the 6'2" sophomore wide receiver Brody Knoll. Knoll is by far the leading receiver on this team with 42 receptions, 634 yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. He is the #1 target for Leland Fresquez. You can definitely expect Knoll to have a big game here in the first round against Loveland. Speaking of Leland Fresquez, let's go ahead and talk about the second-year starter here for Doherty. The junior QB has put up nearly 1,600 yards in the regular season with 14 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. These numbers are a bit of a step back from his sophomore season, where last year he had nearly 2,400 yards, and he also had 21 passing touchdowns to 7 interceptions. Basically the same rating though, so I don't know how much of a step back it really is. But Fresquez is definitely going to set the tone on offense and will be the decider if whether or not they'll beat Loveland here in the first round. As far as key wins and losses here for Doherty, I don't know if they have a key win under their belt. They have wins against Liberty, Palmer, Cheyenne Mountain, Falcon, and Widefield. None of those teams are playoff teams, unfortunately. Cheyenne Mountain did have a pretty solid season, but they did prove to be not as good once they started to face the tougher teams in the I-25 league. They had a 21-8 loss to Rampart. They sort of hung in there. Rampart is a solid squad, but it's hard to be too confident with Doherty long-term here with no signature wins under their belt in the regular season. Now that we talked a little bit about Doherty, let's talk a bit now about the Loveland Red Wolves. The Red Wolves went 4-6 in the regular season with a 3-2 record in that 4A North 1 league. The Red Wolves are led by their senior quarterback, Ryder Easton. This is his second year starting here for Loveland. He definitely passed the ball more this year, though. He has 8 touchdowns to 8 interceptions with just over 1,100 yards. And then rushing the ball here, he leads the team rushing by a good margin here with 400 rush yards and 8 touchdowns. He is by far the leading charge here offensively for the Red Wolves. Then we got another senior after that, the 6'6", 260-pound tight end, Zane DeSouza. DeSouza is first on the team in receptions with 32. He is third on the team in receiving yards with 273. And then he leads the team in receiving touchdowns with 4. Loveland uses him to move the sticks, and he is a phenomenal blocker with that 6'6", 260-pound frame. He is huge for Loveland on offense, and make sure to keep an eye out for him in what he does in that game against Doherty. The leader of this Loveland defense is the senior edge rusher Cody Moore. Moore is the leader in tackles as well as the leader in sacks on this team. He's got 61 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and then he has 5 sacks as well. Moore is the tone setter on this Loveland defense. He might have a hard time versus Doherty's big offensive line, but if he can step up there, that would be massive for Loveland and potentially give them a route to winning that first round matchup here. As far as key games go, the Red Wolves have a few of them. They've played in some close games against some playoff teams. For example, they lost 24-17 to Fossil Ridge, who is a 5A playoff team. And then they beat Mountain View 15-12, which was probably their main signature win on the season. They beat Mountain View, who is a 3A playoff team. And then they lost to Monarch 16-13. That is a tough one for sure. But Monarch did end up winning that league. So to be that close in a game against the league champs is huge there. And then they have wins over Silver Creek, Greeley West, and Pooter. All three of those games were blowouts. For my prediction in this matchup, I am going to go ahead and go with the Loveland Red Wolves. I love the way the Red Wolves have come together in the end of the season to grab a playoff spot. I also think the way they've hung in there against some very tough squads like Monarch and Fossil Ridge, I think that's just huge. When I look at Doherty's schedule, I don't see any games where they kind of hung in there against a tough team. They kind of just got blown out against all the tough squads they faced, like Doherty or Montrose or Mesa Ridge. And so for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and pick Loveland to beat Doherty to face Dakota Ridge in the next round. That game against Dakota Ridge is going to be extremely tough for both of these squads. But I expect this game to be close. These are two pretty evenly close teams. I won't be surprised if Doherty wins, but my pick is for Loveland. So let's go ahead and move on to our next matchup here, where we have 9-seeded Grand Junction hosting 24-seeded Longmont. The first team I'm going to talk about here is the Grand Junction Tigers. The Tigers went 9-1 in the regular season, and they also won the I-25 League, going 5-0 there. I did their season preview, and I actually had them going in the 5-7 win range, I think. And I thought that was generous, but Grand Junction has blown expectations completely out of the water here with this senior-heavy team. And the first player I want to highlight is going to be the senior quarterback, Will Applegate. Applegate is standing at 6'4" and 240 pounds. He is in his third year starting here for Grand Junction. It's been tough the first 2 years, but here in this senior season, this entire team has put everything together here to almost get a first round bye, which is absolutely insane considering where they were at last season. Applegate has 800 pass yards with a 15 touchdown to 2 interception ratio. That is a massive improvement from his 10 touchdown to 11 interception ratio from last year. And then rushing the ball here, he has 430 rush yards and 13 rushing touchdowns. He only had 4 rushing touchdowns last year. So to see Applegate really settling in, putting it all together here in his senior year is huge. Defensively, he kind of pulled back on that side of the ball, which was a bit surprising, but he still got 47 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks there. So Applegate is not only the leader on offense, he is also contributing a lot here on defense for Grand Junction. I also want to highlight the 5'10" junior running back Matthias Martinez. Martinez did not do much his sophomore year, only getting 33 carries for 126 yards and 1 touchdown, but he really turned it on here in his junior season here for Grand Junction, putting up 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns on 6.5 yards per carry. So just a massive improvement, just like Will Applegate, to help get Grand Junction to the I-25 League Championship. In that wing T offense, it is Martinez getting the ball a ton, so we already know that he will be an X factor in this game against Longmont. And then from there, you got the 6'2" junior wide receiver Drew Marsh. Marsh is the leading wide receiver for this Grand Junction squad. He has 337 receiving yards and a team leading 8 receiving touchdowns and a team leading 19 receptions. So not a ton of volume as far as receptions goes, but he is definitely doing the most with what opportunities that he gets. On defense, Grand Junction is led by Austin Music and Mason Langland. These are the 2 tackle leaders with Will Applegate just behind them. Music has a team leading 54 tackles with 3 tackles for loss, and then Langland has 49 tackles with 7 tackles for loss, and that is second on the team. You also have Colton Music in the secondary, though. The sophomore has 4 interceptions, and that leads the team here. As far as key wins go, Grand Junction definitely has a few this season. Early on in the year, they got the crown back from Grand Junction Central as they beat them 35-14. And then a couple weeks later, they got a big-time overtime win over Fruta Monument, who was a 5A squad. And then the next week, they got their one loss of the year to Durango, 38-7. But Durango is a very good squad here, and they have a bye in the first round. So I wouldn't feel too ashamed or discouraged about that loss. And then in the I-25 League, they beat the three toughest teams in the league in order to end the year. Starting off with Centaurus, they beat them 42-22. In the next week, they beat Cheyenne Mountain at Cheyenne Mountain 32-15. And then in the I-25 League Championship against Sand Creek, they just whooped on them 34-6. This is a Grand Junction squad that is battle tested, and they are definitely ready for this first round matchup here against Longmont. So let's go ahead and talk about Longmont now. Longmont went 3-7 on the regular season, and they went 2-3 in that 4A North 2 League. Longmont is a three-headed monster led by the senior QB Colby Holmes, as well as the junior wide receiver Joey Foote, and his brother, the freshman wide receiver Jacob Foote. Holmes is in his third year as starter at quarterback here for Longmont. He had a pretty solid season statistically. He threw for 1,700 yards with 17 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. He is the leader of this high-flying offense. His numbers didn't exactly improve very much from last season, but we can always expect Colby Holmes to put up some pretty solid numbers in every game that he plays in. Holmes' number one target is the junior wide receiver and all-PMC member from last year, Joey Foote. Foote has racked up 64 receptions for 795 yards and 9 touchdowns. All of those are around the top in all classifications. Last year, he had 69 receptions for 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. So Foote is just an absolute workhorse here. And then that's not even talking about his freshman year where he had 37 receptions for 500 yards and 3 touchdowns. So from the very start, Foote has been the chosen one in the wide receiver group, and it is really cool to see that he is still putting up phenomenal numbers in his junior year. Who knows what he's going to be putting up in his senior year without Colby Holmes. The last of the three-headed monster here for Longmont is the freshman Foote brother, Jacob Foote. Foote is the leader in receiving yards as a freshman for this Longmont squad. He has nearly 900 yards on 53 receptions and 8 touchdowns. Foote, you already know, will be on the Newcomer of the Year awards finalist, and he might just win it. Him next to his brother gives Holmes an elite pair of receivers that are ready for the ball at all times. Those three have carried this team to this point, and it's really cool to see them get to have one last shot in the playoffs together. As far as key wins go for Longmont, their main key win in the regular season and their win that basically got them in the playoffs in the first place was their 34-31 win over Thomas Jefferson. Jacob and Joey Foote both had over 100 receiving yards in that game, with Jacob Foote also adding 120 yards on kick return yards. So it's just clear that when those three, between Colby Holmes and then the Foote brothers, when those three are clicking, Longmont can beat really any team that's close to their skill level. They're very top heavy though, so it is a little tough to be too confident in them in certain situations. They also lost a close one to Silver Creek, 28-20. They beat Skyline 48-28, and then their other win on the season was a 62-14 win over Adams City. For my prediction, I'm going to go ahead and choose Grand Junction to win this game to go ahead and face Ponderosa in the next round. I trust this senior core for Grand Junction at the end of the day, and I just think that they've all put it together so well that their chemistry just simply won't allow them to lose to Longmont here early on in the first round. Longmont is a little too top heavy for my liking. I don't like their depth. especially on defense. I just don't think there's a ton to write home about. So I really just think Grand Junction is going to pound the ball and give them a couple score win here over Longmont. Longmont could come out and surprise everybody in this game here, though, with this being the last ride for Colby Holmes and Joey Foote. Joey Foote has been the number one receiver for Colby Holmes since Colby Holmes has been named the starter 3 years ago. I know emotions are going to be running high for both of these squads, but my pick stays with Grand Junction to move on to face Ponderosa in round 2. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and preview this Rampart versus Grand Junction Central matchup. Rampart is rocking the 13 seed, while Grand Junction Central snuck in here with the 20 seed. The Rampart Rams finished with a 6-4 regular season record with a 2-3 league record in that SoCo 2 league. There are two main culprits here for Rampart's success this season, that being the senior edge rusher / offensive tackle Justice Derrickson, as well as the linebacker and running back Camden Bruns. Standing at 6'5", 265 pounds, Derrickson has been an absolute force this season here for Rampart. He leads 4A in sacks, and he is also up there in tackles for loss with 26 on the season. He has 56 total tackles, and he has just been absolutely electric here for Rampart. He sets the tone on the offensive line and the defensive line for Rampart, so you can definitely consider him the X factor here for the Rams. Camden Bruns is another absolute dog for this Rampart defense. He stands at 6'1", 205 pounds. He leads the team with 110 tackles as well as 11 tackles for loss here on the season. He doesn't just contribute on defense, though, because on offense, he leads the charge here with 9 rushing touchdowns, 860 rush yards on 170 carries. He is the workhorse on both offense and defense, so it is quite clear to see why Camden Bruns is considered one of the most impactful players on this squad. Another absolute dog that I want to highlight on this defense is the senior outside linebacker, Nathan Boliston. Boliston is second on the team in total tackles with 63, and he also has 20 tackles for loss on the season. His impact gives Rampart yet another electric player in the defensive front alongside Camden Bruns and Justice Derrickson. His impact is huge for Rampart, and he is another reason why Rampart's defense is usually the reason why they win these games. Rampart actually has a few signature games that gives us a little bit of insight as to what kind of team this is. They played a close game against Lewis Palmer, which they won 15-14 at home. Then they lost to Ponderosa by 10 points in the following week, but they came back and beat Discovery Canyon 14-10 at Discovery Canyon, and Discovery Canyon is a tough 3A squad. They also beat Doherty 21-8. Keeping Doherty to 8 points is huge. They lost to Durango and Vista Ridge, only giving up 21 points in both of those games. They got blown out by Palmer Ridge, and then they beat Air Academy 38-14. I think if you have a matchup for Rampart that allows them to use their defense to control the game and control the clock, then I think they will win this first round matchup. But I guess we'll have to see after we look at Grand Junction Central. Let's go ahead and talk about these Grand Junction Central Warriors now. They went 4-6 in the regular season with a 2-2 league record. I accurately predicted Grand Junction Central's record to be 4-6 on the regular season with how much talent they lost last year, but it is cool to see them to get to make the playoffs this season, as well as their counterpart, Grand Junction. I would say that the main leader of this team on offense and defense is the junior wide receiver / defensive back, Jaime Padilla. Padilla is the leading receiver on this Grand Junction squad that doesn't pass the ball a ton. He has racked up 33 receptions for 612 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. And then defensively here, he leads the team with 47 total tackles, and then he added 2 interceptions as well. He is one of those two-way playmakers that you don't really know how good Grand Junction Central would even be if he wasn't on the team. On offense, a player that sort of came out of nowhere would be the junior running back Caleb Moats. Moats has 600 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns on 98 carries, which leads the team by a very large margin. Moats' offensive production has been vital for Grand Junction Central because they just haven't been that impressive on that side of the ball. So his consistency will continue to be huge going into playoffs here for the Warriors. And last but not least here, the last player I want to highlight for Grand Junction Central is the 6'2", 270-pound junior tackle Victor Martinez. Martinez is the leader on this offensive line, and he is one of the players of this young core for Grand Junction Central that will definitely be huge for them this year and next year. He's a violent player that sets the tone on offense for the Warriors. The one signature win that Grand Junction Central has to their name this season is a 40-14 league win over Longmont. Longmont has the 24 seed in the playoffs this year, and that is Grand Junction Central's one win over a playoff team this year. Other than that, they got blown out by the other playoff teams that they played, and then they blew out the teams like Skyline and Adams City and Eagle Valley to get them to this point. For my prediction in this one, I think that Central is a year away from being able to compete in this one. Rampart's defense is just too violent and too big for Grand Junction Central to be able to get anything going offensively. So I have Rampart winning this one to move on to face Palmer Ridge in the second round. Now let's go ahead and move on to this next one here where we're going to talk about this Vista Ridge versus Highlands Ranch game. Vista Ridge is rocking that 12 seed with Highlands Ranch down at the 21 seed. Vista Ridge is coming into this first round playoff matchup with a 6-4 record and a 3-2 league record in that 4A SoCo 2 league. The first player I want to highlight here for Vista Ridge is going to be the senior quarterback Zayden Stevens. Stevens is standing at 6'3", 210 pounds, and he has been the starter here at Vista Ridge for 3 years now. He had his best season in his sophomore year, and he hasn't quite been able to get back to that level of production, but he had a very solid season this year. He has nearly 1,400 yards passing with 13 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, and then he adds 4 rushing touchdowns and 250 yards on the ground. I'm not going to sit here and say that Zayden Stevens is the most elite quarterback in 4A, but I would say that his experience that he brings for this Vista Ridge squad is going to be huge in this first round matchup. And then after Zayden Stevens, the other tone setter on this Vista Ridge offense is going to be the senior running back Gabriel McFarland. McFarland was at Falcon High School last year, and he balled out before getting hurt towards the end of the season. And this season is no different. McFarland has put up nearly 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns on 9.4 yards per carry this season for Vista Ridge. And it is quite clear that if Zayden Stevens and Gabriel McFarland are having a good day, then so is Vista Ridge. And the last player I'm going to go ahead and highlight here on Vista Ridge is going to be the cornerback and wide receiver Jakelin Watts. Watts defensively has really just taken off this year as a junior. He has 5 interceptions in the secondary, 2 pass deflections, and 23 tackles and a tackle for loss. He doesn't just contribute on defense, though, because on offense he has 14 receptions for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he's effective on both sides of the ball, especially on defense in the secondary. And you can guarantee that Watts is going to be a huge part of this game against Highlands Ranch with how much Highlands Ranch likes to pass the ball. As far as signature wins goes here for Vista Ridge, they've got a couple. Their biggest one was a 21-14 win over Rampart. Rampart is a very tough defensive team, so I'm not surprised at the low score in that one, but it was cool to see Vista Ridge be able to get the win there. Another big win for them was a 21-7 win over Air Academy. Air Academy is a scrappy team, and they just scraped into the playoffs this year. So that's 2 wins there over playoff teams. And then they lost a close one, 20-14 over Durango. And then another win that I want to highlight was their 54-35 win over Liberty. This wasn't necessarily a good win. Letting up 35 against a team like Liberty is a bad sign, especially headed into a game against Highlands Ranch where they're going to be going for the kill shot on every single drive. And then as far as losses go, they lost badly to Columbine, Pueblo West, and Palmer Ridge, as well as that close loss to Durango. Now let's go ahead and take some time here to talk about these Highlands Ranch Falcons. In their playoff preview, I actually had Highlands Ranch going 4-6 this season, with them moving down to 5A, but they exceeded that with a 5-5 record with a 1-4 league record in that extremely tough 4A South Metro League. Highlands Ranch moved down to 4A this year, and this was a big-time shift for them, with them getting to see a lot more success in the regular season compared to the last few seasons. The first player I want to highlight here has to be the senior second-year starter QB, Crew Gehrig. If we had a most improved award here at PMC, it would definitely go to Gehrig. Last year, he threw the ball a ton with nearly 340 attempts, 2,200 yards, 12 touchdowns to 11 interceptions with a 76 rating. Now, this year, he is at nearly 300 attempts, 2,200 yards, 27 touchdowns, and only one interception. And that, folks, is good for a 112 rating. That kind of improvement is absolutely incredible, especially when you consider that Highlands Ranch has faced some very tough opponents here in 4A this season. He is a gunslinger, and he is very experienced in these shootout games, and I definitely expect a shootout here against Vista Ridge in the first round. Speaking of huge improvements, let's go ahead and talk about the senior middle linebacker and running back, Luke Bakken. In the season preview, one of the things that I highlighted regarding my concerns with Highlands Ranch was their run game. Last year, Bakken was the lead rusher with less than 300 yards and no touchdowns. This year, though, he has turned it up to an 11. He put up nearly 1,000 yards in the regular season with 9 touchdowns and 140 carries. That is good for 6.5 yards per carry. And he wasn't done there, though, as he has made himself effective in the pass game as well, as Highlands Ranch loves to pass the ball. He has 32 receptions for 359 yards and 2 touchdowns. Defensively here, he made some more improvements. He had the same amount of tackles as last year, but he had more solo tackles as well as 6 tackles for loss this season compared to 2 last year. He also has 3 sacks and an interception and 2 forced fumbles. So alongside Crew Gehrig on offense, Luke Bakken has found himself to be an extremely valuable player here for Highlands Ranch. And then you combine the fact that he is the tone setter on defense as the middle linebacker. Lastly here, I want to quickly highlight 3 more players. In the receiving room, we have the 2 leaders of this team, George West, who leads the team in receiving yards, and Jaden Puhia, who leads the team in receptions and touchdowns. George West has put up 46 receptions for 741 yards and 9 touchdowns. And then Jaden Puhia has 53 receptions for 693 yards, and he also has 9 touchdowns on the season. Those 2 are due for massive seasons, especially Puhia, who was the number 1 receiver last year. He's having a huge senior year here alongside George West. I also want to highlight the senior linebacker, Vinny Taylor, who might be the meanest player on this team. Taylor is second on Highlands Ranch in tackles with 50. He also has 10 tackles for loss, and he is up there in the lead for sacks with 8. He isn't the tallest player or the heaviest player, but he plays so hard and so violently that it is extremely difficult to ignore his impact. Highlands Ranch definitely has some key games that I want to highlight here, especially in their league games. They won their first league game over Bear Creek 43-20, and then it was a rough stretch with 3 shootouts and 1 blowout loss to Dakota Ridge. They lost 42-28 to Ponderosa. They lost 67-54 against Heritage, and then they just lost last weekend 50-41 against Golden. As far as key wins go, they kind of took care of all the teams that they needed to, including Thomas Jefferson, where they got a 48-28 win there, as well as Kennedy, Aurora Central, and Gateway. Those were all blowouts. And then in the first week of the season, they lost 21-20 over Chaparral. For my prediction in this matchup, it was a tough one, but at the end of the day, I like Highlands Ranch's experience in shootouts this season, so I'm going to go ahead and choose the Falcons to beat Vista Ridge here in the first round. I think that Crew Gehrig and company are ready for this game. They've played in enough shootouts and they've played in enough tough games to be able to win this one and move on to the next round to face Broomfield. We have what's going to be another very exciting matchup next here with Frederick going up against Northfield here. Frederick's rocking that 15 seed with Northfield at the 18. Frederick finished the season at 7-3, and then they went 4-1 in the 4A North 1 League. They lost to Monarch in the league championship, so they finished as the runner-ups there, but it was a close one. The first player I'm going to go ahead and highlight has to be the senior quarterback, Gavin Ishmael. Ishmael is standing at 6'2", 210 pounds, and he is one of the top dual threats here in the state regardless of classification. This year he passed for nearly 2,400 yards, 29 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions, and a ridiculous 136.4 QB rating. Compare that to last year when he threw for 2,700 yards, 29 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, but he threw more attempts and was less accurate last year, so his rating was only 108. So Ishmael definitely turned it on here in his senior year. As far as rushing the ball goes, he was extremely dynamic. He had nearly 500 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns to make that 39 total on the year. Ishmael is an MVP candidate and a certified All-PMC member this year, so he will be absolutely key in this game against Northfield. After Ishmael, we of course got to talk about one of the top tight ends in the state, the senior tight end Burke Eisman. Eisman's racked up 25 receptions for 615 yards and 9 touchdowns. Folks, that is good for 25 yards per reception, which is absolutely insane. Eisman standing at 6'3", 240 pounds, and his work in the pass game alongside Gavin Ishmael has been the engine for Frederick to get to this point. With those two in their senior season, you already know that they are going to bring everything they have against Northfield in the first round. The top playmaker on defense here for Frederick is going to be the junior linebacker Eric Ross. Ross is the team leader in tackles as well as tackles for loss. He has 7 tackles for loss on the season and then 72 total tackles. Frederick isn't exactly known for their defense, but Ross's ability on that side of the ball is undeniable. Now let's go ahead and look at some key games here from Frederick's regular season. They start off with a very tough schedule playing Broomfield and Meade in the first couple of games of the season. They lost to Broomfield 44-20, and then they barely lost to Meade 16-14. And then from there, they really just took care of business, taking care of some non-playoff teams. But they did beat one playoff team in that mix, that being Loveland, 41-7. And then from there, the last playoff team they faced was Monarch in the league championship there, and they lost by 1 point. Monarch blocked a field goal or an extra point at the end. I forget what it was, but that won them the game there. So that is heartbreaking for Frederick. But you already know going into the playoffs that they're looking to avenge that loss here against Northfield. Alrighty, let's go ahead and take some time now to talk about these Northfield Nighthawks. The Nighthawks went 6-4 in the regular season with a 5-0 league record, meaning they went 1-4 outside of league games, but they did win their league, and that is ultimately what helped get them to this playoff spot. The first player I'm going to go ahead and highlight here has to be the junior running back, Xavius Chineth. Chineth is a dynamic playmaker for Northfield. He is the leading charge here on offense. He had over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns rushing the ball on 7.5 yards per carry. Chineth is a dynamic playmaker who makes defenders miss, and he is the workhorse that has led Northfield to a playoff spot for this season. And while Chineth is the leader on offense for Northfield, the leader on defense is going to be the safety Elian Oliva. Oliva is by far the leading tackler on this team with 96 tackles. He's also racked up 14 tackles for loss here and 7.5 sacks. He is on defense what Xavius Chineth is on offense for Northfield, being the workhorse that leads this team at all points of the game. Lastly here, I want to highlight another player on defense, that being the sophomore linebacker Alfred Anderson. Anderson has 31 tackles on the season, which isn't a ton, but he also has 8 tackles for loss, which is second on the team. Then he also is second on the team in sacks with 4. That is a huge impact for a player, especially as a sophomore, so he could definitely end up being an X factor in this game against Frederick. Northfield hasn't beaten any 4A playoff teams this year, but they did beat Pueblo East 28-27, and they are going to be a 3A playoff team. In their first 2 games of the season, they played some close games against Roosevelt and Mesa Ridge. They lost a shootout to Mesa Ridge 50-47. Then after that, they lost a bad one to Heritage 40-15. They kind of took off from there though, as they finished the season 6-1 and 5-0 in league. They absolutely dominated that 4A Denver Metro League, absolutely squashing George Washington, Aurora Central, Denver North, Montbello, and Thomas Jefferson. For my prediction, this one actually took me a long time to decide. I want to pick Frederick, with Gavin Ishmael and Burke Eisman being such an exciting duo to watch, but ultimately I'm going to pick Northfield to win this game. I'm picking Northfield because when I look at Frederick's schedule, they lost 3 games this year, and all 3 of those games were to very run-heavy offenses. That tells me that with Northfield being the definition of a run-heavy offense, I really think that spells trouble for Frederick, especially with Northfield playing in some close games against some very good teams here in 4A. Monarch and Bear Creek will be our next game that we're going to take a look at. Monarch is the 10 seed and Bear Creek will be the 23 seed. Monarch finished with an 8-2 regular season record, and they also went 5-0 in league in that 4A North 1 league. The senior 6'4" quarterback Riley Montemayor is going to be the first player I want to highlight here for Monarch. He finished the regular season with 1,200 yards passing and a 13-2 touchdown to interception ratio. He's not the most accurate quarterback, but he definitely gets the job done for this Monarch squad, allowing them to mix both the pass and run game here on offense. Sharing the ball on offense here with Montemayor is going to be the sophomore running back Malachi Payne. Payne has racked up 700 yards and 5 touchdowns on 6 yards per carry. Him alongside Montemayor form a very good rushing duo, with Montemayor also adding 241 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. It makes it very tough for defenses to know what they're going to do, with Payne being a very good runner and Montemayor being a solid quarterback. The last player I'm going to highlight here for Monarch is going to be the senior offensive lineman Ori Oaknine. Sorry if I mispronounced that one there. He is 6'2", 280 pounds, and he is an absolute bruiser on this offensive line. He allows Montemayor to be comfortable when passing the ball, and is a big reason why Montemayor's touchdown to interception ratio is so great, because he just doesn't allow many pressures. Now let's look at some key games here for Monarch. Both of their losses were blowouts against Fairview and Broomfield. They lost to Broomfield 46-0 at Broomfield, and then they lost to Fairview 49-0 at home. From there, their key wins are a 35-19 win over Centaurus and a 21-20 win over Frederick to win the league championship. That one was surprising, as I definitely had Frederick winning that one, especially at home. But Monarch proved that they are some dogs and that they belong at the top of this league. And then after that, they won a close one over Silver Creek in the last game of the season, 33-31. That is quite concerning, considering Silver Creek is nowhere near the skill level that Monarch is. Now looking at Bear Creek, it is quite surprising that they made it here to the playoffs with a 4-6 regular season record, and they went 0-5 in league games. Under center for Bear Creek is going to be the sophomore QB Riley Wilson. Wilson had 1,500 yards passing, and he had a 10 touchdown to 13 interception ratio, which isn't great, but honestly, with him being a first-year starter as a sophomore on a team that lost a ton of talent from last year, I am not too disappointed with these stats, and I expect him to improve a ton going into next year and the year after that. It will be interesting to see if he can have a good game against Monarch and give Bear Creek a chance to win that game. Aside from Wilson, the main offensive contributor for Bear Creek has been the senior running back Junior Hernandez. Hernandez has 800 yards and 9 touchdowns on 6 yards per carry. He's the most consistent and probably the most impactful player on this Bear Creek offense. If Bear Creek has any success against Monarch, it will most likely be due to Junior Hernandez's work in the run game. And he's also the leading player in the secondary for Bear Creek, getting 4 interceptions there. So Junior Hernandez doing it on both sides here for the Bears. The junior linebacker J.D. Lazaro is the last player I'm going to highlight here. He is the main playmaker on defense outside of Junior Hernandez. He leads the team in tackles with 71, and then he also has a team-leading 9 tackles for loss. For key games in the regular season for Bear Creek, they played in the toughest league in 4A. They have Dakota Ridge, Ponderosa, Heritage, Golden, and Highlands Ranch all in their league, and they lost all 5 of those games. They got close against Golden, losing 14-7 there, but the other 4 games were all blowouts. Their main signature win on the season was a 20-19 win over 5A Brighton, and then things pretty much just fell apart once they got to league games. They haven't beaten any playoff teams this year, so it's a little hard to be too confident in them going into this game against Monarch. My prediction for this one is pretty simple. I have Monarch winning by a few scores here. I think Monarch is just the more consistent team. They have taken care of business against teams similar to Bear Creek's skill level. So, like I said, I have Monarch winning here by a few scores. Riverdale Ridge versus Golden is going to be the next matchup that we're going to take a look at here. This is the second to last of the first round matchups here for 4A. It looks like Riverdale Ridge started off the year 8-0 before losing that Broomfield game in the league championship, and then they beat Grand Junction Central to finish the year 9-1 with a 4-1 league record. Senior QB for Riverdale Ridge, Isaiah Medina, balled out in his second year as the starter for Riverdale Ridge. He finished the year with 1,300 yards and 20 touchdowns as well as 5 interceptions, and that's good for a 129 QB rating. Those stats are pretty similar to his stats last year. He just threw for more yards last year, but he had pretty much the same touchdowns and interceptions. Last year, though, he was a little more effective running the ball. He had 8 rushing touchdowns compared to only 2 this year. Medina is a very good quarterback, though, and he gives Riverdale Ridge a very good chance of moving on here in the first round. Medina's number 1 target was the senior wide receiver Bobby Jackson. Jackson was by far the leader in every receiving category with 35 receptions, 544 yards, and 10 touchdowns there. Him and Medina have phenomenal chemistry with both of them being seniors and both of them having played with each other for a couple years now. So I like what those two bring to the table a lot for this Riverdale Ridge offense. Another senior I want to highlight here is going to be the senior defensive end Colton Lancaster. Lancaster is the leader of this defense, leading the team in tackles with 45, and he also leads the team by far in tackles for loss with 11. And then he's got 6 sacks on the season as well. Riverdale Ridge's defense isn't exactly ferocious, so to have guys like Lancaster to strike fear into opposing offenses is going to be huge here, especially in the playoffs. Let's go ahead and look at some key games now for Riverdale Ridge in their regular season. Surprisingly, they only faced 3 playoff teams. All 3 of those teams were league opponents. They beat Grand Junction Central in the last game of the season 49-21 at home. Then they beat Longmont 56-0 at home as well. Their other game against a playoff opponent was against Broomfield for the league championship. This one was at Broomfield and they lost a tough one, 22-13. There were a lot of questions about Riverdale Ridge going into this one because we didn't have any statistics on their players, so we didn't really know if they matched up well against Broomfield. But with them staying close against Broomfield in this game, it showed that they are tough and that they're ready for the playoffs. Let's go ahead and talk about these Golden Demons now. Golden went 5-5 in the regular season, and they went 2-3 in league games. This was a bit below what I expected their season to be during their season preview back in June. I had them at about 7 to 8 wins, but they lost their starting QB, Kalen Huford, early on in the season. And it's tough to come back from that. I believe Huford was in his third year as starter, so they had to adjust big time. So I'm just glad to see them in the playoffs and surviving in that tough league that they're in. The first player I want to highlight is going to be the sophomore QB, Thatcher Matthews. Matthews stepped in big time in replacement of the injured starting quarterback, Kalen Huford, and he took off from there. He had 1,250 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. But he wasn't done there, though, as he also was the team's leading rusher with 884 yards and 9 rushing touchdowns on 5.3 yards per carry. It's amazing that Matthews was able to step in so cleanly in replacement of Huford, despite having no idea that he was going to be the starter for the rest of the season. It's going to be very exciting to see what he does in his first career playoff start, because it is the start of a long career as starting quarterback for the Golden Demons. Matthews' number one target this year was the senior 6'3" wide receiver Jack Dixon. Dixon had a massive senior season. He didn't do much as a junior or a sophomore or a freshman, but as a senior, he put up 683 yards, 7 touchdowns on 36 receptions. All of those lead the team. Noah Limback will be the final player I'm going to highlight here for Golden. He's standing at 5'11", 220 pounds, and he is a force up the middle for this Golden defense, as well as a force on the offensive line as well. He racked up 38 tackles and 5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks on the season. And then he also forced 1 fumble. Limback is true to Golden's identity of being big, strong, and tough, and he will definitely be a key part of what Golden does in the playoffs. Golden played in a lot of tough games in the regular season. They started off with a tough road loss at New Smyrna Beach in Florida, 41-19, and that was the game that Kalen Huford got hurt. Then after that, they lost to Brighton, 21-9, and that was a really surprising one. I think they were still adjusting to the new quarterback and everything, but you'd really expect them to beat Brighton at the very least. After that, they went on a 3-game win streak against Thomas Jefferson Pooter in Lakewood. But once they got to league games, things just sort of fell apart. They won a very, very close game against Highlands Ranch, 50-41 in a shootout. And then they just barely beat Bear Creek 14-7. Outside of that, in league, they lost to Heritage, Ponderosa, and Dakota Ridge. All of those were blowouts. For my prediction in this matchup, this is a tough one, but I am ultimately going to pick Riverdale Ridge to beat Golden to move on to the next round. I like Riverdale Ridge's experience a lot, despite them being a first-time 4A program. They are a senior-heavy class, and they have some players that have been playing with each other for a couple of years now, so that chemistry's there, and you combine that with the fact that Golden has a sophomore QB starting in his first playoff game. So yeah, I think I'm going to go with Riverdale Ridge here to win by 1 score to move on to the second round. And last but not least, folks, let's go ahead and talk about this Heritage versus Air Academy game. Heritage got the 11 seed while Air Academy snuck into the playoffs at the 22 seed. Heritage went 5-5 in the regular season with a 3-2 league record in that 4A South Metro League. Jamison Cease is the one under center for Heritage. He had a very solid junior season. He had 2,100 yards alongside 21 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. And then on the ground, he added 300 yards and another touchdown on 4.5 yards per carry. Pretty solid dual threat QB, and he is the leader of this extremely potent Heritage offense. And then you got Jet Belika as the running back for this Heritage offense. He has had a very solid season, both on the ground and through the air. His impact in both of those makes him one of the top players on this team. He put up 680 yards and 15 touchdowns on 87 carries. That's 7.8 yards per carry. And then in the pass game, he was second on the team in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. He put up 31 receptions for 490 yards and 4 touchdowns. Having a guy like Belika to move the sticks in both the pass and run game is huge for this offense, and it is a big reason why they put up so many points this year. The number one target for Jamison Cease on this Heritage offense is going to be the senior wide receiver Tanner Turch. Turch has been an absolute force here for Heritage. He put up just short of 900 yards alongside 11 touchdowns on 43 carries. That's 20 yards per reception. Turch, Belika, and Cease form a three-headed monster that any team in any classification would not want to face in the playoffs. That's not all, though, because you also have the 6'7", 240-pound tight end Camden Jensen to throw to as well. And he gives Jamison Cease yet another reliable target to pass to. Heritage had probably the toughest schedule out of all the teams in 4A this season, so that means they definitely had a few key games to look at here. The first one I'm going to talk about is their 67-54 win over Highlands Ranch in the second to last week of the season. And then from there, they lost to Ponderosa 45-34 at Ponderosa in the final week of the season. And then they beat Bear Creek 61-23. Heritage clearly has no problem putting up a lot of points on the board. It's just defensively where things get a little iffy. They beat Golden 28-7. Then they beat Northfield 40-15 and Severance 40-21. Those are all playoff teams, with Severance being a 3A squad there. And then they also lost to Arapahoe by 2 scores, Mesa Ridge by 2 scores, and then they didn't do too well against Columbine or Dakota Ridge. But with them playing in such a tough schedule alongside one of the toughest leagues in the entire state, regardless of classification, I think Heritage is one of the more battle-tested teams, and they should be ready for the playoffs. Now, looking at the Air Academy Cadets here, they went 4-6 in the regular season with a 1-4 league record in the 4A SoCo 2 league. The leading contributor offensively for the Cadets is the senior running back, Ben Fernengle. Sorry if I mispronounced that name there. Fernengle has put up 1,200 yards, which is good for third in the state in 4A, alongside 9 rushing touchdowns on 6.6 yards per carry. If Air Academy sees any success offensively versus Heritage, it will be through Fernengle. In a run-heavy offense like Air Academy's, you have to have at least one guy on the offensive line that can completely change the game around. And for Air Academy, it is their senior Jackson Downs. Downs is 6'5", 300 pounds, and he is the tone setter on this offensive line. There's no way that they would have the success they've had offensively without Jackson Down out there on the offensive line. Someone who does it all defensively for Air Academy is going to be the junior Jackson Schmatica. Schmatica leads the team in interceptions with 2. He leads the team in forced fumbles with 2. He leads the team in sacks with 4. And then he is third on the team in total tackles. Schmatica's impact is made with his versatility. He is effective in the pass rush as well as in coverage and in run-stopping situations. Looking at Air Academy's schedule, it doesn't look like they beat any playoff teams this year. They actually struggled pretty badly against the top playoff teams, like their 58-0 loss to Durango, which was a league game. They sort of hung in there against Vista Ridge, where they lost 21-7, and then they allowed Rampart to get 38 against them in a 38-14 loss. Outside of that, their wins are against Widefield, Stanley Lake, Sierra, and Liberty, and none of those teams even sniffed a playoff spot this year. I'm going to keep my prediction pretty brief for this matchup here. I have Heritage beating Air Academy. I just don't think that Air Academy has shown me much in the regular season that would give me the idea that they would even compete in this game. I have Heritage winning by at least 3 scores here to move on to the second round. And last but not least here, folks, I'm going to go ahead and go through each of the members of the podcast brackets and go through each of their first round predictions here. First off, in the first round, I'm going to look at Gideon's prediction for the Doherty versus Loveland game. He has Doherty winning this one 21-14. Cody has Loveland winning this one 14-13. Simon also has Doherty winning 21-14. And then lastly here, Phoenix has Doherty beating Loveland 21-20. So 3 of us have Doherty winning, and then 2 of us have Loveland, but all of us have this game ending closely, and it definitely should be that way. Next here, Gideon has Grand Junction beating Longmont 35-7. Cody has Grand Junction over Longmont 23-21. Simon has Grand Junction over Longmont 35-7. And then Phoenix also has Grand Junction over Longmont 35-6. So me and Cody definitely have this being a bit closer, with Cody having this actually as an extremely close game, with Gideon, Simon, and Phoenix all predicting this to be a blowout. In the next matchup between Vista Ridge and Highlands Ranch, Gideon has Vista Ridge over Highlands Ranch 17-14. Cody has Vista Ridge over Highlands Ranch as well, 26-20. Simon has Vista Ridge as well, 17-7. And then Phoenix has Vista Ridge over Highlands Ranch, 35-14. So I'm really the only one that chose Highlands Ranch to win this one. I think it will definitely be a close game. I know both of these teams have been in some shootouts this year, with Highlands Ranch being in the shootout in basically every game, but that is definitely a big game to keep an eye out for. Next up, it's the Rampart versus Grand Junction Central game, and Gideon has Rampart over Grand Junction Central 28-7. Cody's got Rampart as well, winning this one 20-10. And then Coach V has Rampart shutting out Grand Junction Central here 35-0. Last but not least here, Phoenix has Rampart winning a close game here 23-20. Next up here in the Golden versus Riverdale Ridge game, Gideon has Riverdale Ridge winning 14-7. Cody has Golden winning that one in a close game as well, 29-24. Simon's got Riverdale Ridge 14-7 there. And then Phoenix chose Golden to win 19-16. That is another one of the matchups where we kind of flip-flop as a podcast. Me, Simon, and Gideon have Riverdale Ridge winning a close one, and then Cody and Phoenix both have Golden winning a close one, but all of us have this as a close game. Moving on now, Gideon has Heritage over Air Academy 35-7. Cody also has Heritage winning this one 35-13. And then Coach V, you already know he chose Heritage 28-7 here. And then as for Phoenix, he also chose Heritage. This is one of the easier picks. In our opinion, obviously, Heritage should win that one by a couple of scores. In the second to last game between Monarch and Bear Creek, Gideon chose Monarch to win this one 35-14. And then Cody has got Monarch putting up 41 over Bear Creek in a 41-28 win. Simon chose Monarch as well to win this one 35-14. And then Phoenix also has Monarch winning a close one 28-20. So all of us have Monarch winning this one. We kind of disagree whether it's going to be a blowout or a close game. But either way, we got Monarch moving on to the second round. In the last game, it is Frederick versus Northfield, one of the tougher games to predict. Gideon has Frederick winning 28-24. Also got Frederick winning a close one 24-21. As for Coach V, he picked Northfield to win a close one 20-14. And last but not least here, Phoenix has got Frederick winning a shootout over Northfield 42-28. That's one of those games that can go either way. They have completely different styles of play, so they don't really match up well against each other. So it really could go either way. And folks, that will do it for this playoff preview for the 4A classification for the 2024 boys tackle football season. I want to thank you all for listening, and this is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I will see you all next week. Peace out.
Obviously, you want a trainer who can make you stronger and faster with the work you put in, but what about a trainer who can help you rehab and recover like the pros? Look no further than Junkyard Training, that not only offers specific strength and speed training, but also offers a plethora of recovery and rehab techniques like cryo, cupping, recovery boots, and so much more. Learn more today by visiting junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594. Once again, visit junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594 and get started today. Hey, it is your showrunner, Cody Stauffer here. And, obviously you've been listening to all the other fellas do a really quick recap and then a playoff preview outside of Coach V, who is waiting for the last week of 3A. But let's go ahead and get through this recap real quick so that way we can go ahead and jump into the good stuff, which is the playoff preview. Now, in 5A, starting on Thursday, Cherokee Trail won 41-0 over Smoky Hill. Rossin Valley completed their undefeated league play 17-7 over Arvada West. Vista Peak Prep fell to Legacy 22-55. Notable stat from that game in a Playmaker of the Week candidacy: Tyler Anderson, 22 carries, 195 yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns in that win for Legacy. And the last Thursday game was Valor running for 7 touchdowns in their route of Rock Canyon, with Chase Hanash here running for 4 touchdowns and 170 yards on the ground. Moving on to Friday, Westminster 50-burgered Boulder on their way out for the season. Fruita Monument ran for 273 yards in a 1-score win over Thunder Ridge in the season finale, being led by Chris Bennett at 147. The Mullen Mustangs end 4-6 after a big win over Rangeview to close the regular season. Legend coasts to a 31-3 win over Regis Jesuit. Mountain Vista leans on the run in a 49-7 win over Castleview, securing the 2 seed and an undefeated season. Fort Collins wins 49-19 over Prairie View, with the big 3 of Cranford, McKinn, and Hermson all performing well. Cameron Williams runs for 2 and throws 1 score in Mountain Range's win over Lakewood. Shout out John Eckelmeyer, who had 2 receptions for 114 yards and a score. Erie pounds away in a 50-18 win over Horizon to wrap up their regular season. Pine Creek here secures a bye with a big win over Mountain Fort Carson, 49-16. Chetfield plays Columbine for about 1 quarter pretty close before it falls out of hand in favor of Columbine, 42-13. A classic Kubat game, 22 of 33, 3 passing touchdowns in Fossil Ridge's 42-7 regular season finale win over Brighton. The Knights hunt down the Lobos to the tune of 52-0. Cherry Creek wins senior night after beating Grandview 35-18 and secures the 1 seed. In the Grandview corner, Blitz McCarty has a decent game, 16 of 27, 262 yards, and 3 scores to 1 pick. But Brady Vodica here was incredible, 15 of 23, 4 touchdowns to no picks. And then Jaden Fox went nuts with 20 carries for 224 yards and a score in the Bruins' regular season finale win en route to the 1 seed. Arapahoe forces 6 turnovers in the 19-7 win over Eagle Crest. Definitely Playmaker of the Week candidacies on the defensive side of the ball. Shout out AJ Adams with 17 total tackles and 1 for loss. But senior Anthony Cloutra, I want to say is how you say that, Cloutra, notched 2 interceptions, 8 tackles, and 2 of those tackles being for loss in this game. So definitely a really good performance here to keep his name in the circle for Playmaker of the Week. Overland runs over North Glen on their way to the postseason, 42-9. Jarius Ward, typical 113 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also getting 7 tackles and 1 for loss on defense. And then the freshman phenom quarterback, Angel Chavez here, 14 of 20, 4 touchdowns to just 1 pick, finding Avante Hendricks and DJ Davenport twice apiece. Angel Chavez, definitely a Playmaker of the Week candidacy here from that freshman class. Denver East pile drives Denver South on Saturday, 33-8 in one of the most classic rivalry games. The East defense notches double-digit TFLs with DJ Crow at 4 of those tackles for loss on 12 total tackles. That is a fantastic performance. And then the usual suspects of Dion Giles-Ray here, 2 interceptions as the East defense just completely suffocates the Ravens' offensive attack to a big win. Douglas County finishes the season 5-5 and punches a ticket to the postseason, 32-8, with a win over Chaparral, highlighted, I would say, by Roman Saez's kickoff return for a touchdown. Now, this was a more brief recap here, but stay tuned as we talk about a lot of these teams more in depth on the playoff preview coming right up. And now let's go ahead and get to the goods here as far as Colorado playoff football here. So similar to Gino, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk about the initial round of the postseason, and then I'm going to follow that up with the, kind of predictions and notable players, notable games that they've played, and just kind of go from there. So, yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the number 16 versus 17 seed game between Denver East and Grandview. The date and time is not yet set, but the winner will play Cherry Creek. And let's go ahead and start with the higher seed here first. So, Denver East here They finished the season 6-4. Some of their notable wins include an upset 3-point win over Chatfield, as well as their routing of Denver South this past week, 33-8. Some of their notable losses here would be their one-score loss to Arvada West, 29-21, and then probably their loss earlier in the season to Eagle Crest, 17-7. These losses and wins are kind of defined by where I think they kind of stand as far as the greater landscape goes and kind of the teams that they played closer to kind of scale them for you, the listeners. As far as notable players go, got to talk offensively. Sean Campbell, 835 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns on the season. Definitely the focal point of their offense, and they definitely run to open up the pass. And then defense is definitely the Angels' strength here, allowing only about 17 points per game on the season. Their pass rush has been absolutely a nightmare to go against, with 28.5 sacks as a unit, headlined by DJ Crow, 10.5 sacks, 25 hurries, not to mention in the run game, 24 tackles for loss on 82 tackles, one of the most dominant players in the state being DJ Crow. Meanwhile, in the secondary, Dion Giles-Ray capitalized off of great pass rush with 6 interceptions, having more picks on this team than anyone else combined. Obviously, these are big teams with a lot of contributors here, but I'm trying to keep it quick just for a quick highlight overview of these playoffs. Moving on to Grandview here, the Wolves finished 5-5. They had a notable couple of wins in league against Cherokee Trail, 14-13, and Eagle Crest, 38-15. Their really close losses or notable losses on the season were 10-9 against Ralston Valley to start the season, Arapahoe a few weeks ago, 25-13, and Creek here in the last week, 35-18. On offense, they are notably led by first-year starter Blitz McCarty here, 1,554 yards, 16 touchdowns to 7 picks, and he has leaned on Zay Nito, one of the top receivers in the state, but statistically, churned out 644 yards and 9 receiving touchdowns this year. Meanwhile, they have 2 running backs here who had over 500 yards and 8 touchdowns apiece in Yamas and Blanks here. Now, turning to the previews here, I actually switched up my bracket from when I initially did it here, and it's going to be a full sweep here for Denver East. I have Denver East favored 21-17. Originally, I was leaning Grandview, but I just think that Denver East's defensive experience is going to match up very, very well against this younger QB. Gino also picked Denver East 23-14. Phoenix picked Denver East 28-20. Gideon picked East 24-21, and Coach V picked East 21-17. Notice these are all one-score games here between East and Grandview. We think this is going to be a very close game and one that Grandview could really pull out, honestly, if they get a couple of plays on defense and capitalize off of some turnovers. But this East team, like I said, very experienced, went to the postseason last year, returned a lot, if not almost everybody, for this squad. So the Angels here getting ready for Grandview here this week. Another game that does not yet have a schedule is the number 9 Erie Tigers versus the number 24 Overland Trailblazers. The winner of this game will play the 8th-seeded Pine Creek. Erie here finished the season 8-2. They have notable wins against Broomfield, 13-3, and Mullen, 48-13. That is a league game, as Erie in their first year in 5A did secure a league title. Their only losses were to Ralston Valley, 48-38 in an electric shootout, and Mountain Vista, 55-12, as kind of a welcoming present here to 5A. As a team, though, the Tigers' strength definitely relies between the tackles here, rushing for 2,425 yards as a team and 25 touchdowns, mainly headlined by Braylon Tolliver and Ronan Ward's efforts here on the ground. Ward also contributing through the air, throwing for 8 touchdowns. Defensively, Carson Hageman continues to lead this team. He led this team last year in tackles, and he did so again on the 5A level with 102 and 15 for loss, while also notching 6 sacks. And Tolliver had 5 of the team's 14, you heard it here, 14 team interceptions this season. Braylon with 5 of those. This team is going to force you to make mistakes. They play hard, they play fast, they're very physical. It's a great culture that they have over there at Erie. Now, fellow league winner Overland here, very young team, but a winning team here. finishing the season 6-4, winning big league matchups against Westminster 50-21. That basically nailed in that they were probably going to make the playoffs if they won out, and then they just finished with a 42-9 win over North Glen. They have one confusing loss here to Vista Peak Prep earlier in the season 15-13, and then lost to Fountain Fort Carson 34-14. And as far as common opponent goes, also played Mountain Vista losing 55-6. Like I said, this is a young team, however, though, and it is led by freshman quarterback Angel Chavez here, who had 12 touchdowns to just 7 picks on 1,200 yards. The lead receiver was also a freshman in DJ Davenport here with 678 yards and 6 scores, but this offense was balanced out by some senior presence here, such as senior Avante Hendricks, who had 6 receiving touchdowns as well for 468 yards. And then Jarius Ward, the tailback here, one of the best tailbacks in the senior class, 1,032 yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. This is a balanced team that, also benefited from Hendricks's 4 interceptions and 4 pass breakups on defense. But, I think that the future is very bright here in Overland. I just don't know if it's very bright next week here or later this week in this playoff game. I have Erie winning this one 42-16. I just don't see Overland really being able to slow down this Erie rushing attack. And I think that against a young quarterback, this Erie defense is going to force a lot of turnovers and make this offense make a lot of mistakes. Gino has Erie winning 35-13. Phoenix has Erie 38-8. Gideon has Erie 28-10. And Coach V has 35-14. Erie on top. That is a complete sweep for Erie here, favored to beat Overland, but best of luck to both teams in this contest. Now we got a scheduled game here. This is Regis Jesuit, who hosts number 21 seed Eagle Crest at 6:30 p.m. Friday, November 8th. The winner will play Valor Christian, the number 5 seed. Regis Jesuit heads into this game 5-5 with notable wins against Fossil Ridge on the road, 35-14, as well as Mullen 23-12. They do have some tough losses here, including their first 3 games, a loss to Pine Creek 28-14 and Legend 31-3 to just kind of scale where they're at. The defense here for the Raiders has had to do some pretty heavy lifting here, led by Grayson McPherson, who eclipsed the century mark in tackles and was accompanied by seniors Kai Shelton and Jace Filliman, who also both had double-digit tackles for loss. Offensively, we knew there were going to be some growing pains as they went with the freshman phenom Luke Rubley here. He had his share of ups and downs this season, but has some notable moments like back-to-back hat trick performances against Fountain Fort Carson and Douglas County as a blanket of reassurance. Eagle Crest here also finished the season at 5-5 with notable wins against Denver East 17-7 and a huge win over fellow playoff team Fort Collins 30-6. However, once they got to league play, they end up losing all of their league games except for Smoky Hill, including a 14-13 loss against Cherokee Trail. Now, this offense has ran exclusively through Joe Steiner, leading the team in rushing with 8 rushing touchdowns and 624 yards, while throwing for another 1,381 and 14 scores for a combined 2,000 yards and over 20 touchdowns. His main target being Woody Combe here, 39 receptions, 8 scores, and 586 yards. Meanwhile, defensively, Ramajde Owens here led the team with 76 tackles, 11.5 for loss, and was second in sacks on the squad. Now, when you add all this up, where does that land here for everyone in their predictions here? I have Regis Jesuit winning this one 28-11. I'm just not really impressed with Eagle Crest's performance against more notable teams. But I guess the same could be said for Regis Jesuit here, as we have a couple of upsets here with Gino picking Eagle Crest 21-16, Phoenix picking Eagle Crest 24-12, Gideon and Coach V also picking Eagle Crest 14-7 here. We'll see what happens, but I stand alone on the Regis Jesuit Island here. But best of luck to both teams Friday the 8th at 6:30 p.m. Now, the number 13 versus number 20 game is Castleview and Cherokee Trail, respectively. The winner will play the 4-seeded Columbine here. This game takes place Friday, 6:30 p.m. in Castle Rock. Now, speaking of Castle, we got Castleview finished the season 7-3 with notable wins over Mullen 28-7 and a double overtime win over Rock Canyon 23-22. However, they have very brutal losses in their 3 losses by about 30-ish point margins to Legend, Valor, and Mountain Vista. This offense runs a balanced attack here, using the run to set up the pass. Example here, Aaron Perry, 860 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns, with Gordon posting a 9-4 TD to INT ratio. And then the defense just played pretty well as a unit. They played the pass pretty well with 11 interceptions and 30 pass deflections. Cherokee Trail here, on the other hand, the Cougars went 4-6 on the season, with their most notable win being a 14-13 upset win over Eagle Crest, and then they lost close to Grandview 14-13 and close-ish to Arapahoe 24-7. Quarterback Tyson Smith has thrown for 1,315 yards with 10 touchdowns to 6 picks, but Cade Brook has been the probably premier player of this program, a team-high 8 sacks as well as an interception on the season from that edge spot here. And then Marquise Jameson had a pick as well as a team-high 8 pass deflections in the secondary here. Looking to it, I got Cherokee Trail in an upset. I think that this team has a ton of experience. They've been in the playoffs multiple years, and I just think that it kind of evens out a little bit more than this Castleview team. I have it being a close game, but I have an upset 20-16. I once again will be standing alone on this, so maybe I'm just way off base here, as Gino has Castleview 27-14, Phoenix has Castleview 28-14, Gideon and Coach V both have Castleview 35-17. We'll see. I think Castleview is definitely the more balanced, talented, and better coached team, but I could see Tyson Smith trying to go out with at least one win and leaving it all out on the field, along with a ton of seniors that they have in that class of 25 that's kind of been in development for the past few years. Moving on, we have the number 14 and number 19 game. Number 19, Fort Collins, is going to travel down south to the NAC here to face number 14, Arvada West, 7 p.m. Friday, November 8th, and the winner will play the 3-seeded Ralston Valley Mustangs. Now, the home team here, A West, is 6-4 on the season, with notable wins such as 29-21 against Denver East, and then 51-14 bludgeoning of Fountain Fort Carson. They do have some overshadowing losses, however, like the 35-30 loss versus Fairview and the 22-21 loss versus Chatfield. I would argue this team is defensively spearheaded, but it's a pretty balanced squad here. There's 50 TFLs, and they just have a tough run defense. Mainly Jackson Pyatt here with 114 total tackles and 17 for loss, but you have other guys in the mix like Kevin Sanchez and whatnot who have been getting it done on the defensive side of the ball. And then you also have in the secondary Jessen Truesdale and Atticus Tillman, who both had 3 interceptions, with the latter, Tillman here, notching 14 pass deflections on the season. Offensively, they have 2 700-yard rushers in Adrian Samala and Jaden Green. Meanwhile, Duhacek had 2,000-plus yards passing and 19 scores through the air. So overall, just a very, very balanced team, and one that plays just kind of, a straightforward brand of football, I would say. Fort Collins, on the other hand, 6-4 here with notable wins against Brighton 45-27 and Horizon 51-25. Meanwhile, lost really big to Fossil Ridge 56-14 and lost to Fairview in a wild shootout 68-49. Offense is the theme for the Lambkins here, with the big 3 of Justin Cranford going for 1,951 passing yards on 67% completion and an 18-8 TD to INT ratio, leaning heavily on Levi Hermson, who had 1,168 yards, 12 receiving touchdowns, not to mention another 967 yards on special teams here, making for a special 2,000-yard season for Levi here. And then Jack McKeon here, who balanced out the attack, rushing for 1,125 yards and 20 scores. However, this defense just really doesn't inspire me. They've allowed some pretty incredible amount of points, especially against playoff teams. And I think Arvada West is going to go ahead and run away with this game 28-19, with maybe Fort Collins getting some garbage time scores here. Gino takes A West big as well, 30-7. Phoenix has A West 40 burgering FOCO, 42-12. Gideon does as well, but in a bit more of a shootout, 49-35. And Coach V has A West cruising by 45-14. Best of luck to both squads, Friday, November 8th at 7 p.m. at the NAC. Now, my alma mater here did punch their ticket to the postseason and will be the 11 seed hosting Douglas County Friday the 8th at 7 p.m. The winner of this contest will play the 6th-seeded Legend Titans. Arapahoe finishes the season 7-3 here, with their defense still taking care of business, only allowing 18 points per game, and that includes outliers of 35, 34, and 41. This defense is, I think, headlined by junior Brody Seek here, or Sheik, not sure how you say that, Brody, but regardless, 20 hurries, 10 sacks this season, along with 15 tackles for loss. You can always count on Arapahoe having a solid pass rush here. Shout out to Coach Brayton, former NFL guy and a great colleague / coworker of mine. But I digress a little bit here. You also have 3 defenders who have 4 interceptions in Cloutre, Johnson, and Watson here. Meanwhile, Connor Gilchrist and A.J. Adams both had over 80 tackles on the season. Offensively, senior one-year starter Mitch Price has protected the football well, throwing 17 touchdowns to just 2 picks. Meanwhile, there's 3 different rushers with over 350 yards, and Andrew Smart is the big body receiver who's made life manageable, going for 857 yards and 10 scores in Arapahoe's 7-3 record. They have notable wins over the likes of Eagle Crest and Grandview, as well as Rock Canyon, but their losses against Mountain Vista, Pine Creek, and Cherry Creek show that they're not quite equipped for a super high-scoring shootout. Douglas County here crossed the finish line at 500 here, 5-5, beating Rock Canyon 38-21, and a very close win over Fountain Fort Carson 20-17. And they have a really close loss to Chatfield 27-24, as well as a bigger loss to Castleview 37-16 in the battle for the Rock. 4 players here. Caden Absher is absolutely the heart of this defense and maybe even this team. 130 total tackles and 14 for loss, along with 4 sacks in the pass rush. He has an incredible highlight film. Please go check him out. Scouts, if you are listening, this guy is an absolute stud who you want to have on your squad and leading your defense. Meanwhile, Garrett Griffin and Cameron Caillou here both had over 80 tackles with 4 and 7 for loss, respectively. And this offense has gotten by with junior quarterback Parsons, who's pieced together a solid season in huge part thanks to Nolan Case and Roman Saez here, combining for over 1,300 yards and 8 scores through the air. I am going to be showing some homer bias here, taking my alma mater, winning 26-16, but I'm going to be echoed by Gino, who has Arapahoe edging out Douglas County 22-17. Phoenix is going to pick Arapahoe by a little bit more, 21-8. Gideon is going to take A-Rap in a one-score nail-biter, 24-17, as is Coach V, who has the Warriors sneaking by 20-17. Best of luck to both these squads, Friday the 8th at 7 p.m. Chatfield hosts number 23 Rock Canyon, who snuck in here at the last second. This is going to be 7 p.m. on Friday. The winner will play the 7-seeded Fairview Knights. The Charges ended in a tough 7-3 with close wins over Eagle Crest 23-16 and Arvada West 22-21. Meanwhile, they lost some close ones like Rawson Valley 15-12 and Denver East 29-26, and didn't really compete against Columbine in a 42-13 loss. Now, the notable storyline here is Cash Williams, the sophomore starting quarterback here. In his first year as a starter, has a solid debut of 14 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Meanwhile, he's also ran for another 466 yards, and the running game has been way more of a crutch here to kind of ease this younger quarterback into the varsity role here. They have over 390 rushing attempts as a team. Corey Ball is leading the way with 582 yards, along with Brock Narva and Bryson Leal here, who both have 300 yards apiece. Defensively, Logan Kundred had a psycho year with 110 tackles and 20 for loss, followed by Caleb Espinosa and Balderston here, who both had double-digit TFLs. And then Aiden Nassim here, or Nashim, sorry if I'm butchering that, led the team with 7.5 sacks and 13 hurries this season. Rock Canyon here, they have a surprising win over Fossil Ridge 31-26 that was early in the season, and also beat Thunder Ridge 31-20. Meanwhile, they lost to Castleview in double overtime 23-22 and lost to Douglas County 38-21. Rock Canyon here, they are relied upon very heavily on the run game, as Tyler Meyer here ran for over 1,500 yards and 12 scores, and Levi Shield was their leading defender, who had 88 tackles and 9 for loss here. Chatfield ultimately has great coaching here, and I'm going to trust them a little bit more than Rock Canyon and have Chatfield winning 24-16. Meanwhile, Gino picks Chatty to handle this one 27-10. Phoenix doesn't think that Rock Canyon has what it takes, losing 41-6 to Chatfield. Meanwhile, Chatfield wins Gideon's vote 28-7 over the Jaguars. And according to Coach V, it's going to be much of the same, having Chatfield favored 35-7. Best of luck to both these squads Friday at 7 p.m. Now, we got our very last matchup that we're going to be talking about this week. Number 15, Fossil Ridge, who squares off against Mullen, the number 18 squad up north, 7 p.m. Friday. The winner will play the number 2 seeded Mountain Vista Golden Eagles. The Sabercats of Fossil Ridge finished 6-4 on the season. They have some notable wins, such as their one-score W over Loveland, 24-17 to start the year, and then their shellacking of Fort Collins, 56-14. They lost what, in hindsight, looks like an upset to Rock Canyon 31-26, but they also lost to Columbine 35-21 and Fairview 29-26 for the league title. Now, this offense does not run without Nick Kubat to Marcus Mosier here. This connection makes the world go round as they connected 53 times for 769 yards and 13 touchdowns. Kubat on the season threw 31 total touchdowns, with Owen Wynn and Luke Garvin combining for over 700 yards, and Garvin having 7 more of those receiving touchdowns. Dick Toshkoff here had 10 TFLs, which is atop the list here, over guys who were close like Mason Griffin, Barrett Green, and Isaac Gilliland here, who had all over 7 TFLs. And on the season, this defense actually forced 21 total turnovers, so that is something to watch against a Mullen team who's been known to turn the ball over. But let's take a look at the Mustangs here. They finished the season 4-6 with notable wins over Horizon, beating them 40-14 at home, and then won a very close one that punched their ticket and left Legacy looking from the outside in, 28-27. They did lose some closer ones to Regis 23-12, as well as Crean Lutheran 35-12, and then some blowouts to some of the top teams in the state. Depew here, Dante, the running back, is a 1,000-yard rusher and had 11 touchdowns. And passing-wise, Code Dietrich is still holding it down, almost eclipsing 2,000 yards this season, but at a shaky 14-12 TD to INT ratio. One of the main threats, his biggest threat actually, both metaphorically and literally, might have to be the 6'6" Bonner here, who's the biggest receiving threat with 8 receiving touchdowns. That is over half for those counting at home. And defensively, Troy Milo here had 7 sacks and a couple dozen hurries to go with his 13 TFLs. And Estevan Loya Jr.'s efforts to eclipse the century mark in tackles. However, despite all this here, it's going to be Mullen losing to Fossil Ridge, in my opinion, 34-14. Gino kind of has the same idea, 31-10, Fossil Ridge favored. Phoenix has Foco gating by in a close one, 27-24. Gideon also has a bit of a closer game, 24-14, with the Sabercats over the Stangs. And Coach V thinks that the Stangs will battle, but ultimately will fall short, 20-14. Best of luck to both these squads. That is 7 p.m. up north, Fossil Ridge against Mullen on Friday. As a reminder here, the games in question are Denver East versus Grandview to see who plays Cherry Creek, Erie versus Overland to see who plays Pine Creek, Regis and Eagle Crest to see who plays Valor Christian. We also got Castleview and Cherokee Trail to see who plays Columbine. We got Fort Collins and Arvada West to see who plays Ralston Valley. Arapahoe and Douglas County to see who plays Legend. Chatfield and Rock Canyon to see who plays Fairview. And Fossil Ridge and Mullen to see who plays Mountain Vista. That has been my 5A playoff preview. We're obviously going to follow up next week with the 1 through 8 seeds in those games. So stay tuned for that and all of our further playoff action as we continue to get further into the meat of this high school Colorado tackle football season. But don't go too far because we have our Playmakers of the Week. Just a reminder, these Playmakers of the Week are brought to you by Code Red Coaching. Visit CodeRedCoaching.com, where the grind to greatness starts with the mind. Enhance your mental performance with my guy Cody Rosenthal here at rosecj.6599@gmail.com. Or you can find him on Instagram or Twitter. Go ahead and set up an appointment, whether you are an individual looking to become a bit mentally more acute and sharp, whether you're looking for professional development, or whether you are a team looking for ways to help out with the sports psychology of your program. Go ahead and visit coderedcoaching.com today and go ahead and perform mentally like these athletes of the week here, these playmakers of the week that we have here. I'm going to go ahead and start in 1A. Handful of nominees for Phoenix here, such as Quentin Torres here. He had a carry for 20 yards and touchdown, 2 receptions, 58 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks in Forge Christian's W. You got Buena Vista's Eli Shuknecht here, 13 carries, 153 yards, 4 touchdowns, as well as a punt return for a touchdown. Monte Vista's Azaria Hurtado here, 6 receptions, 126 yards, and 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, and a fumble recovery in their win over Centauri. But also from Monte Vista, you had Alex Marquez here, 12 tackles, 10 solo, 2 assisted, 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, a blocked field goal, and a partridge in a pear tree. And North Fork's Payson Peen here, 22 carries, 162 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Gideon's nominees for Playmaker of the Week include William Daniel of Basalt, 138 rushing yards, 112 rushing yards, 2 offensive touchdowns, 14 tackles, 2 for loss in the win over Aspen to keep the Skiers outside the playoffs. Graydon Buchanan here of Gunnison, 63 passing yards and a touchdown on 1 attempt. Meanwhile, 152 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns to get the 3rd straight win of the season over Salida. Jacob Dunning of Lamar, who had 345 pass yards, 5 passing touchdowns to no picks in a win over Florence. Cash Alchwager here, 12 carries, 358 rushing yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns in their win over Valley. Holy cow, that is foul. Benjamin Schroeder of Berthoud, 2 sacks, 4 of 4 on PATs, 1 of 1 on field goal attempts, forced fumble recovery, and that fumble recovery going to the house, as well as 11 tackles in a blowout win over Eaton. In 3A, Coach V has Patrick Noga of Pueblo County, 8 carries, 128 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Meanwhile, another 93 receiving yards, 7 tackles, and a forced fumble in a win over Canyon City. Simon Lunsford here, the senior quarterback of Green Mountain, 18 of 28, 340 passing yards, 4 touchdowns to just 1 pick, along with a rushing touchdown in their 56-34 win over Conifer. Jaden Pagano, the senior running back out of Lewis Palmer, who had 2 rushing touchdowns in an upset win over Pueblo South. In 4A here, Gino is looking at D. Al Capone VZ here, 222 yards and 3 touchdowns on 34 carries. Colby Holmes of Longmont, 19 of 25 for 336 yards and 6 touchdowns to no picks in a win over Adams City. William Applegate, or Will Applegate of Grand Junction, 3 of 6, 56 yards, 1 touchdown. But really 12 carries, 69 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 6 tackles in a 34-6 win over Sand Creek to secure a playoff spot was big. And then in 5A, I liked senior Anthony Clotre. Anthony, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep accidentally butchering that until I probably meet you in person here at Arapahoe. 2 picks, 8 tackles, and 2 for loss in the 19-7 win over Eagle Crest. I also got freshman quarterback Angel Chavez here of Overland going 14 of 20 with 4 touchdowns to just 1 pick. And then also I got DJ Crow of Denver East, 4 TFLs and 12 tackles in their dominating win over Denver South. Now last year we had our winner of Playmaker of the Week from the Denver Southeast game be our Playmaker of the Week. However, I'm going to go with the freshman quarterback Angel Chavez here of Overland. I think he's just done a great job of managing the pressure, managing the stress of being a quarterback, and helping lead this team to the playoffs for the first time in a minute. And you had to take care of business here in the very last week of the season to make sure that you stamped your league title pass, and they did so exactly. And I just want to give huge ups to this freshman QB Angel here out of Overland High School as my 5A Playmaker of the Week. Gino's 4A Playmaker of the Week is going to be D.L. Capone, VZ here, 222 yards and 3 touchdowns, like I said, in 34 carries in a 45-34 shootout win over Heritage to solidify their first round bye in the playoffs. Go ahead and listen to the 4A playoff preview that Gino just gave us to learn more about those squads and why that's so impressive. Coach V here is going to go with Patrick Noga out of Pueblo County here. 8 carries, 128 rushing yards, a hat trick of touchdowns. Meanwhile, another 93 receiving yards on 6 receptions puts him over 200 scrimmage yards, not to mention his 7 tackles and 1 forced fumble in the 28-21 win over Canyon City. Keeps Pueblo County Pueblo County's playoff hopes alive, as a loss here would have put them out of reach of a playoff spot. Statistically, he did a lot in this game to give them the win, is what Coach V had to say. So Patrick Noga, your senior athlete out of Pueblo County, is going to be your 3A Playmaker of the Week. In 2A here, Gideon is going to go with William Daniel, 138 rush yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 112 receiving yards. That makes for 250 total yards, and that second touchdown being a receiving one. Not to mention double-digit tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble in the win to keep Aspen out of the playoffs, slam the door, and secure Basalt's number 2 seed. Go ahead and listen to Gideon's playoff preview to hear more about Basalt. And finally, in 1A, Phoenix, if you didn't listen to his segment, double back, listen to the recap, and listen to his full explanation. But he went with Eli Shuknecht here of Buena Vista. I mean, it's really hard to argue with 5 touchdowns in a game that helps secure you the 5 seed and a home game in the postseason. So, as a recap here, our Playmakers of the Week brought to you by Code Red Coaching are Eli Shuknecht out of Buena Vista, William Daniel of Basalt, Patrick Noga of Pueblo County, D. Al Capone VZ of Ponderosa, and finally, Angel Chavez of Overland High School here. Once again, visit CodeRedCoaching.com, where the grind of greatness starts with the mind. Reach out to my guy, Cody Rosenthal, rosecj.6599@gmail.com, so that way you can be as mentally strong and perform as well as these very athletes. And that will do it here, folks. Stay tuned. We have plenty more content as we wrap up girls flag football. Go ahead and listen tomorrow to our episode that has the semifinals and championship recaps. And go ahead and also stay tuned for the 5A Player of the Year awards. We have a bunch of categories that we did for girls flag football, and we actually have polls running now through the next few weeks here. We got 1A polls open right now on our Twitter, so go ahead and find us on Playmaker Corner on Twitter/X, and go ahead and place your vote. We're going to have 1A this week, 2A next week, 3A the week after, 4A the week after that, and 5A to wrap it up. So we're going to keep those pretty relentless here to get through the season. We also have plenty of playoff action, so stay tuned to our story on Instagram at Playmakers Corner, where we're going to be posting score updates and highlights as well. We got plenty of highlights coming out to you on TikTok here to try and get you by and get you your fix of Colorado football as we try and be everywhere at once. Go ahead and be on the lookout for us on the sidelines of games, whether that is Phoenix, whether that is Gideon, whether that is Gino, whether that is Coach V, or myself. We are very excited for the tackle football playoffs. They're going to be kicking off starting this week, and we hope that everyone gets their fix, whether that's through attending the games or listening to us anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google Podcasts, or anything like that. Make sure that you have notifications turned on all those locations to listen to our latest and greatest recaps. I have been your showrunner for this show, Cody Stauffer, signing off.